to call to order the Ann Arbor City Council meeting of August 19th, 2019. Mayor Taylor is out of town, so I will be chairing the meeting tonight. I've only done this one other time, so please bear with me. Can we please begin with a moment of silence and rise?
Moment of silence for what? I'm not sure. Anything to choose.
And now, if you're able, can you please remain standing for our Pledge of Allegiance? Clerk Boudry, can you please call the roll of council?
Councilmember Hayner.
Here.
Councilmember Bannister.
Here.
Councilmember Griswold.
Here.
Councilmember Lum.
Here.
Councilmember Grand.
Oh, here. Sorry.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Here.
Mayor Taylor, absent. Councilmember Eaton.
Here.
Councilmember Nelson.
Here.
Councilmember Smith. Present. Councilmember Romali.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Can someone please move tonight's meeting agenda? Moved by Councilmember Nelson, seconded by Councilmember Eaton. Any discussion of the agenda? Councilmember Nelson?
I understand that there's been discussion with staff that we reconsider from the last meeting, August 5th meeting, DS2. I think the number is 190956, the bigger one. I'm asking that we consider further consideration.
Okay, for tonight, obviously. Okay. So that will be, assuming someone will resend us that item. It's not in the packet?
It's not in the packet.
Is it?
No.
It is? Was,
It's not.
it's not, okay.
No, this is the Trayvon.
So if someone could resend that, we last discussed it at our August 5th meeting, thank you. We'll add it as item DC2? Okay, it's now DC2, item DC2. Any other comments, concerns regarding the agenda? All in favor as amended? Aye. Opposed? The agenda is approved. Mr. Lazarus, do you have any communications this evening?
I do, Mayor Pro Tem. Just a couple of things quickly. There are some items attached to the administrator's report that I think are of interest. One is the monthly crosswalk update, and the second is some information on the County Road Commission Projects Committee meeting that lists the projects within the city over the next 5 years. It's associated also with some information about the renewal of the county road millage next year. From a safety standpoint, you'll also find in the administrator's update, as well as some information we're going to be sending about our efforts for back-to-school safety. This is our last meeting before school starts, so that introduces the campaign. And also, I'd like to inform members of council that Chief Cox has some great ideas about how to increase the presence and awareness of police officers for enforcement during the back-to-school week as well, just to get everybody back in the knowledge that kids are crossing the street again, merrily on their way to school.
Thank you very much for the update.
Oh, if I could, I also want to thank Officer Burnett for being here this evening and lend his assistance.
Thank you very much. We have two introductions tonight for our new city assessor and city treasurer. Both are in the finance area, so Mr. Crawford, can you please, there you are, come forward to the podium and introduce these new members of your team. Thank you.
Thank you. Council, you may remember that in the financial area, we have several retirements that have come up, and so we're in the middle of a transition. So tonight, I'm happy to, you have on your agenda, actually, back up, last meeting you had on your agenda, the appointment of Jerry Markey, and I wasn't able to introduce him then. I did want to bring him here tonight. He comes to us with a lot of experience. He comes to us. He's been a county equalization director, and he's been most recently the assessor in Taylor. But Jerry is here tonight. Jerry, if you could. So if you see him wandering the hallways or in his office, this is Jerry Markey.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and council members and city manager. I appreciate working with you and with Tom and with your taxpayers. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
I'd also like to introduce Mike Pettigrew. Mike Pettigrew has been the deputy treasurer for the city of Ann Arbor for a number of years, and he was recently promoted to treasurer, and he is here. Mike, can you come up for a second?
Hello, council members and Mayor Pro Tem Lum. This is an honor. I'm very grateful to everyone, including Mr. Crawford, that I can take on this responsibility, so thank you.
And I did want to mention Mike's responsibilities will include customer service, treasury, parking referees, and risk management activities. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. And congratulations to you both. We now come to public comment reserve time. Public comment reserve time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment reserve time, one needs to have signed up in advance by contacting our city clerk. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may only have one person speaking at a time, and speakers may not grant their reserved time to another speaker. Finally, if you require assistance while speaking before council, we'd be delighted to provide it. And additionally, I would just add that we do have rules for this chamber regarding handheld signage. And this is also, our rules stipulate that signs not be held high, but actually they're supposed to be displayed in the back rows. So this is a point of information, and also to encourage everyone to respect the space given our public speakers. So thank you very much for acknowledging that. Our first speaker tonight is Matthew, and I apologize if I mispronounce your surname, Canton Zarite. Close, thank you.
Thank you. All right, I'm here today to talk about the Green Road configuration, but some of my comments will also apply to Traverwood if we're talking about that also tonight. And my name is Matthew Catanzarite. I'm speaking on behalf of the Washtenaw Bicycling and Walking Coalition. First, I would like to thank Councilmember Ackerman for bringing this effort back for review, because it provides an excellent advancement towards Vision Zero with little to no investment. And the same applies for Traverwood, because we're just talking about these roads have both been repaved, and we're just talking about how the paint's going to go onto the road. So it's a really low-cost way to, improve safety for non-vehicular road users. So thank you for that. The work by the city staff and the Transportation Commission has been very thorough, includes responses from the public in favor of these configurations as well, I will add. Improvements in the safety and connectivity with these projects include the benefit, well, particularly for Green Road, the benefit of pedestrians crossing Green Road at Plymouth will have to cross, it still sounds insane that they have to cross 5 lanes of traffic, but that is an improvement over 6 lanes of traffic. So that's one really great thing for anybody that's ever had to cross that road, if it's going to Bush's or Plum Market or CVS or any of the retail centers in that area. Regarding hazardous conditions for cyclists because of heavy freight traffic going in and out of these retail areas, I'd like everybody to consider Stadium. There's a post office on Stadium, and there was possibly, I believe it was a road diet there that added bicycle lanes along Stadium. And speaking from experience, that has been a successful effort to increase the level of comfort for non-vehicular road users, I would say. And then also with the new development in the northeast part of Ann Arbor, this project will provide alternative means of access for the hundreds of households along Green Road to get to Bush's, Plum Market, any of the other commercial retail centers along that road. I think this is going to be very important. I know it's been brought up that traffic is bad here. There's rear-end accidents. There's lots of traffic jams backed up. And, if we do nothing, it stays the same, and we have a bunch of new development. So it's not going to get any better. So by providing alternative means for people to travel these corridors, be outside of a vehicle, I think that you're going to, long range, prevent, these traffic backups and potential possibilities for crashes. And lastly, from the staff report on these road configurations, particularly the green, I believe it was the level of service for automobile was, the delays are going to be increased from a range of 7 to 11 seconds, which I believe a lot of people are willing to give up for the safety of everybody that lives in that area. I think it's sad that we put a higher value at the convenience of drivers in these areas versus the safety of non-vehicular road users in that area. So I'm just glad that this is still a topic. I mean, I know everybody's put a lot of effort into thinking about it over the last few months. So I congratulate everybody for keeping this fresh and having it be something that we consider again, as opposed to it kind of dying out, coming back as another project. So low cost, great safety improvements.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Blaine Coleman.
This city council deals with global and national issues all the time. The city council is now dealing with global climate issues all the time. The city council this year unanimously passed a resolution to boycott Wendy's for the sake of farm workers. That's a good thing. The city council has voted to boycott Burma for human rights reasons. This city council has voted to boycott apartheid South Africa for human rights reasons. And this city council can never, ever use the excuse that it concerns itself only with the city limits of Ann Arbor. That is demonstrably untrue. And to add to that fact is City Attorney Postema, who has just reported in MLive saying, yes, the city council has the authority to vote on a resolution favoring cutoff of military aid to Israel. City council has that authority. There's no doubt about it. City council has done many similar things, and now the city attorney is confirming, yes, you, the city council, have the authority to vote on a resolution to favor cutting off military aid to Israel. And it's a simple resolution. We are against military aid to Israel. Simple. And if you forget it, look at your agenda tonight. It's right on the subject line of my talk. The other argument we've heard against this resolution is that it's just too complex. Councilmember Ackerman has made the argument that it's just too complex. Now, he's an educated Michigan man, and he says it's just too complex. I don't believe that argument, and when he thinks about it, he won't either. It's not a good argument. The Human Rights Commissioner a few days ago made the same argument, also a highly educated person from a prestigious institution. That Human Rights Commissioner made the same argument saying, quote, I am not intelligent enough to analyze complex foreign policy issues. That is basically the quote from that commissioner. Well, I don't believe that argument either, okay? Now, is it complex when you watch a huge military power, a white supremacist power like Israel, gun down thousands of unarmed human rights marchers? Is that complex? No, it's not complex. Councilman Ackerman, it's not.
Thank you.
But for
Our next-
those
our
of
next-
you, yeah, my name is Mojgan Savabi
Right.
Esfahani.
Our next speaker
Go
is
ahead.
Mojgan Savabi
Savabi Esfahani.
Savabi Esfahani.
Good
Thank
job.
you.
All right. But for those of you who still are struggling with, what is actually happening in Palestine to Palestinians by Israel, I'll give you a very brief and quick, history lesson. You know how European colonizers came to this continent, killed a lot of the local people, and on their dead bodies they built their new country? That's what European settlers did. They came here, they killed upwards of 10 million natives, and on their dead bodies, they forced black Africans to build what we see here today, America. Now, the same thing happened in Palestine. European settlers went to Palestine, massacred people of Palestine, and on their dead bodies, they built their Israel. So that is a really bad thing. Genocide is bad. Killing people who are living in their homes and not bothering you is bad. So I recognize a lot of people in America are, for a very long period, been protected against learning about what Israel does. And there has been absolutely no questioning what Israel does. But that is changing, because the idea that we should cut off aid to Israel is not only being discussed here in Ann Arbor, it's being discussed at the highest level of American government, in the Congress of the United States of America. It's being discussed. Bernie Sanders, a very popular presidential candidate, said after he heard that Israel has denied visa to Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, the only two Muslim members of the Congress, he said in an interview, if Israel doesn't allow our lawmakers to visit Israel to see for themselves what's happening, then maybe we should cut off the money that we give them, billions, billions, and billions. So this is not far-fetched. This is an idea that's being tossed around by people in the Congress and people who are human rights activists, who are environmental activists. We are saying, consider it is our duty to talk about cutting off aid to Israel. Israel is a racist, supremacist government being supported fully by the United States of America. And 38 billion is going to be going to Israel in the next 10 years. That 38 billion can pay for American health. It can pay for American people's education. We don't have what Israelis have.
Thank
Keep
you.
the 38 billion and cut
Thank
off
you.
the money to them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker, sorry. Apologies. Our next speaker is Henry Herskovitz.
Good evening. I wish to respond to some comments made here on July 15th. Those comments were, this is how it begins, they say. First, it's about potholes and roads. Then it's about fixing the potholes and roads. Then it's about Jews and their cars causing the potholes and roads in the roads. There is absolutely no logical connection presented by that speaker to conclude that Jewish-owned cars create the potholes in Ann Arbor. She presented a ludicrous argument and asked that council swallow it. The speaker was, in my opinion, trying to claim that anti-Jewish sentiment is created in a vacuum, that non-Jews, her words, attribute bad things like potholes to Jews for absolutely no reason whatsoever. Let's try to set the record straight. Here's some examples. Anti-Jewish sentiment always follows bad Jewish group behavior. It is cause and effect, not a product of one's imagination. There is a reason for anti-Jewish sentiment. Anti-Jewish sentiment followed the bombing of the King David Hotel in 1946 by Jewish terrorist Menachem Begin and the Irgun. Anti-Jewish sentiment followed Israel's attack on the USS Liberty and the killing of 34 U.S. sailors. It followed President Johnson's treasonous stand-down orders to the Sixth Fleet en route to save the ship. Anti-Jewish sentiment follows every white phosphorus bomb dropped by members of the Jewish state onto densely populated Palestinian neighborhoods. It follows every sniper killing of unarmed Palestinian protesters. Anti-Jewish sentiment follows the manipulation of our Congress. It followed the ouster of Cynthia McKinney and recently deceased Paul Findley. It follows Israel's recent refusal to allow entry to Palestine of 2 members of our Congress. I could go on. Perhaps Israeli author Israel Shahak said it best: anti-Semitism and Jewish chauvinism can only be fought simultaneously. As I look upon the faces of the City Council, I see no evidence whatsoever of anti-Jewish sentiment. Don't let people try to convince you otherwise. Council can craft its own resolution to halt military aid to Israel. Such a resolution is a call for peace in the Middle East, and it just drips justice. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jessica Chen.
Good evening. My name is Jessica Chen, and I'm a resident and board member at the Liberty Lofts condo building located on 2nd Street in downtown Ann Arbor. Our condo association requests that the City of Ann Arbor provide compost pickup services for our building. We have an ongoing Green Liberty Lofts initiative whereby we're trying to reduce our environmental impact. Many of our residents have clamored for a composting program, but our requests to the city for compost pickup have been denied. We know the city shares our commitment to reducing landfill waste, so we believe that this is simply a bureaucratic oversight that we're now asking you to rectify. We've requested compost services of various employees at City Hall over the last 3 years, including most recently Lauren Kolaski, the environmental supervisor of Public Works, who contacted the city on our behalf. We were told that it was not logistically possible, and in the past, reasons such as limited capacity and potential street congestion have been cited. We ask you to consider the following points in response. 1, regarding capacity, there is a relatively constant volume of waste material coming out of the building. If the city provides compost pickup, less material will be discarded into the landfill via the regular trash pickup. More compost picked up by the city results in less garbage picked up by the city. And 2, regarding street congestion, the city's composting program truck already services our block of 2nd Street for the neighboring properties. This same truck need only make an additional stop to empty a bin from Liberty Lofts. Our request is for a service already provided to other Ann Arbor residents and covered by property taxes. While the increase in multi-family dwellings in downtown Ann Arbor may indeed have led to increased complexity for waste management, this issue should be addressed sooner rather than later. We want to be environmentally responsible, and we pay our fair share through property taxes for compost pickup. So we're asking for 2 specific actions to be taken. First, Councilmember Ramlawi has advised me that the city is currently rethinking the solid waste management plan. So we ask that when compost contracts are renegotiated, composting services are provided to multifamily buildings. And second, in the meantime, we ask that the council direct the Public Works manager to allow our building a single bin for compost of the same size as a single-family residence to be picked up at the same time as the other bins on our block. Thank you for your consideration of this matter.
Thank you. Thank you. Our next and last speaker is Mark Caroy.
Thank you. I am here today to discuss the Police Oversight Committee that was formed, and want to go over some of the topics I believe they should look into. I've shared some of this with the committee earlier, and some of you were already there because a couple of you sit as ex officio members of the committee. One thing I found disturbing recently, not so recently, more, it was actually a couple of years ago, which I hope they look into, is the fact there was an incident that was reported nationally about a hate crime against a Muslim UM student. And what disturbed me about it was the FBI investigated, Ann Arbor Police investigated, and the prosecutor's office of Washington County investigated it. And the FBI never made any public statements regarding the incident. However, one of the investigating personnel from the Ann Arbor Police Department made a statement that he believed that the statement made by the alleged victim was false, that he believed it was fabricated. And he was going to send a report to that effect to the prosecutor's office. What happened was the prosecutor's office, after reviewing it, issued their own statement saying the interests of justice required no charge to be filed against this young woman. It left a lot of questions in my mind because I'm wondering if there's policies involved that prohibit police personnel from making statements regarding people who are making complaints to the police department. In this case, I'm wondering what message sends to people who want to report hate crimes, that if they do, that an officer is going to make statements, and that were in fact reported nationwide. Washington Post, everyone covered this. And what does it tell the public when the prosecutor's office makes a vague statement that there's going to be no charges against this young woman, and the FBI makes no statement at all? It leads one to believe that something wasn't really done in a proper manner, and was this police officer violating a rule, or should there be a rule that prevents this type of disclosure? And does it create distrust between the Muslim community and the NRPD? I don't know, but there are very questionable circumstances regarding that particular case, which have never been resolved, to my satisfaction anyway. Secondly, I'm also wondering what goes on as far as the police department. There's something called LawNet, the Livingston Wash Non-Narcotics Enforcement Team. What are we doing to supervise this agency? You know, they're involved in various types of drug operations, investigative operations. I know I've sued many of these people before in other units across the state. Very questionable behavior. What is the city being doing to supervise these people? I think we need to look at what tools that they're using. Tasers are one thing. We recently had a case where a state trooper went to prison over using a taser imprudently. We need to have policies and make these policies public, and to look at what goes on in our police department. Thank you.
Thank you. Next are council communications. Are there communications from council? Councilmember Bannister.
Just wanted to give I just want to give an announcement that we will not be having council caucus on 2 weeks from Sunday, because it's, we're going to have, the meeting, council meeting will be postponed till Tuesday, September 3rd that week. And so the evening before the meeting will actually be Labor Day. And so many of us will be at Labor Day picnics on Monday, September 2. Also, Councilmember Hayner and I believe we want to speak to, there's been a lot of uproar in Ward 1 in the last few days about the announcement of a roundabout being built on Broadway out in front of the Morningside development. The construction is supposed to start on September 6th, and there's been a lot of concern in the neighborhood that that will divert traffic up the Broadway Hill instead of onto Plymouth Road, which Plymouth Road was designed to handle the commuter traffic, and Broadway is a residential street. So we're also looking at the concerns over the pedestrian and bike safety issues around this roundabout issue that have not yet been addressed. So I want to thank all the residents for their numerous phone calls and emails about this roundabout, and council is working on it, and we should have news by that September 3rd meeting, if not before. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Griswold.
I want to thank staff for the monthly crosswalk update report, and also for the ongoing work that's been done on the road reconstruction projects. I know it's quite frustrating when council votes down a road reconstruction project, but sometimes it's not, no, we're not going to do anything. It's no, Ann Arbor deserves better, and there are some improvements that can be made to make it even safer for all roadway users, and especially the cyclists and the pedestrians, and that is what's happening now. And I also want to thank everyone who's written in, everyone who's talked to me. We are going to have a safe Ann Arbor. Yesterday, I was at the sustainability picnic, and there were leaders and members from almost every nonprofit and community group related to sustainability. They were all working together. Dr. Missy Schultz was there. It was really a positive experience, and it got me thinking, why can't we have a leader like Dr. Schultz for Vision Zero, like we do for sustainability? Someone who's going to bring us all together. and make sure that we're spending all of our dollars wisely. So I'm really optimistic about that, and we do have an open position in the budget in that area. So I also want to make a comment that I've heard that road diets and road reconfigurations, where we're just painting lines on the road, that it's really low risk because it's low cost. It's never low risk when you're dealing with a vehicle and a human that's on the roadway, because there's always the risk of human injury, so we need to be careful. Another good news item is that we're receiving money from the county, and it includes a few years out, but maybe we can move it up sooner, for bike infrastructure on Washington Street. I did not vote for the William Street bike infrastructure because I really wanted Washington Street, and it looks like that is going to happen sooner rather than later. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other council members? I do have a comment. I'd like to comment on a meeting that's taking place on Wednesday with the University of Michigan. Fire Chief Kennedy and Assistant Administrator Fournier are the city reps at the meeting, which includes discussions of a University of Michigan student-led project to design a prototype fire station, as well as the University of Michigan's potential financial support for replacement of Fire Station Number 5 on North Campus. Station Number 5 is outdated and needs to be replaced. It's also been determined that relocating the station may result in better service to Northeast Ann Arbor. The response times in Northeast Ann Arbor are already a bit worse than the balance of the city. And with all the residential growth taking place, it's clear that something needs to be done. Staff indicated back in April that the city made a request to the University of Michigan to include approximately $5 million in University of Michigan's capital plan to pay for construction of a new station. The city also asked the University of Michigan to confirm it would fund a replacement. Staff has indicated they will be following up on that ask Wednesday. Hopefully, the University of Michigan will commit to financial support. The University of Michigan does not pay taxes and has taken several properties off the tax rolls over the years, and funding a new station would, in my opinion, demonstrate the university is committed to being a good, strong community partner, plus a new station benefits the University of Michigan as well as the city. And then just to follow on to Councilmember Griswold's comment about these road re-engineering, redesign plans, I will just note that, that the reconstruction plans for these roads are not being interrupted. It's the re-engineering that we're talking about. But the reconstruction plans, although I know they're viewed as not timely enough for many, and if you drive these roads, you'll appreciate that firsthand. But those plans for reconstruction are still in our capital improvements plan and are not being disrupted by these continuing conversations about the re-engineering plans. Thank you. So no other communications. In terms of communications from the mayor, Mayor Taylor is making the following appointment nominations for council's consideration at our September 3rd meeting. Councilmember Zach Ackerman, reappointment to the Planning Commission through June 30th, 2020. Deanna Lernahan, a partial term appointment to the Transportation Commission through May 31st, 2021. And James Summers, also a partial term appointment to the Transportation Commission. This one would be through May 31st, 2022. Mr. Summers is not a resident, so it would require 7 votes to waive the residency requirement. Again, these are for council consideration at our next meeting, September 3rd. Moving to the consent agenda, can someone please move the consent agenda? Moved by Councilmember Eaton. Is there a second? Seconded by Councilmember Griswold. Is there any discussion of the consent agenda? Councilmember Nelson?
I'd like to pull for discussion CA 15, please.
Okay. We'll move CA 15 to the first item, sorry, after the consent agenda. So it would be, we'll say CA 15, but it'll be the first item after the consent agenda. Okay, thank you. Any others? Discussion? Councilmember Hayner?
I'd just like to comment on CA5. It's a approval for a supplemental fire services agreement between the city and the Regents of the University of Michigan through 2024. And so it's my hope that the remarks that our Mayor Pro Tem made earlier about the university's relationship with our fire services are reflected in that agreement. And we find that it's
Hear, hear.
appropriate.
Thank you.
Ms. Mayor,
Councilmember Eaton?
Pro Tem. In lieu of pulling CA6, I just want to comment on that some comments I made at the caucus last night may have confused some of my colleagues. This resolution is completely independent of the discussion that's ongoing about development premiums in the downtown zoning areas. This is just a routine revision of our fee schedule for payments in lieu of providing affordable housing, and this is just an adjustment that we do annually. So pardon me for any comment that I may have made that may have confused any of my colleagues last night, and I'll be supporting this.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Eaton. Any further discussion of consent agenda? Okay, so all in favor of approving consent agenda items 1 through 14, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The consent agenda is approved with 10 council members present, satisfying the 8-vote requirement, also on CA4. And now, if someone would move consent agenda item CA15. Councilmember Nelson, seconded by Councilmember Eaton. Councilmember
Yeah, so
Nelson.
I just had a few questions about this item. I'm trying to pull it up on my computer, and my computer is acting up. I understand that we made a request for proposals last September, and then there were 7 responses. So I was just looking at the details of this item and looking for the explanation of how the other proposals were evaluated and rejected, and I'm just wondering if that information is available.
Mr. Fournier, thank you.
So it's a request for proposal for professional services, and so the proposals are all evaluated based on the quality of the service, experience of the individual, experience of the company, in addition to price. So I don't know if I can get into specific detail about the other proposals, but the committee, I believe, was unanimous in their choice of Dr. Davis because of her experience working with public sector agencies and her experience working with cities in particular.
Okay. Yeah, Councilmember Bannister had lovely things to say about Dr. Davis. I've never met her. She said that she met her at the library. The only reason I'm posing this question is that we passed a resolution in December about RFPs like this. Because you have a system of scoring and choosing the best proposal. And so I guess my question was, I just was wondering if you still had that information, because that
Certainly.
was supposed to come to us with this. And honestly, if I had not been completely distracted with other things last week, this would have been an appropriate question to the agenda, so I should probably apologize for not submitting it in writing last week, but I'm asking it now.
Yeah, certainly. We have all of those records in City Hall. All that information has been preserved, so.
Okay.
Councilmember Eaton? Are you finished, Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Okay.
So at this point, I'd like to move to postpone that until we receive that information that we've asked for through that resolution we passed in December.
Okay. Is there support for the postponement? Councilmember Nelson? Discussion of the, and to a date, yes.
It
Yeah, how
won't
quickly
take you
can you
long
do
to provide that information.
No, not at all.
Okay, until
September
our next
3rd?
meeting.
September 3rd meeting?
I think we're fine with that.
Yeah, that's fine.
think,
There's- yeah.
There's a little bit of ships crossing in the night where this was put out before that resolution was adopted. Certainly, there's no secrecy here, so we can summarize the data in a table for you.
Okay. Thank you. Any further discussion to postponement? Councilmember Hayner?
Is there so a lot of us weren't on council when this was passed, this joining up with the one county, right? And so this is driven from that one county initiative? Is that correct?
It stemmed from it. I think, to get into a little bit of detail, we were looking for something to follow up the initial training that was provided. We put out an RFP. There were many respondents. There were interviews, scoring that occurred. Based upon that, Dr. Davis's firm was the top rated. She graciously came and gave a session at the library last February, close enough. And we funded this in the current FY20 budget, so that's kind of why there's an extended period involved. But it is, I actually met with Administrator Dill last week, and I think there's a remerging of the ways with the city and the county on the One Community initiative.
Yeah, I just was wondering where this whole notion came from, so thank you.
This was passed in a resolution from council a while ago, and we've been reporting quarterly on actions that we've taken under the DEI program, but there was always the intent from council to follow up with training and include a staff assessment as part of that.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor of the postponement to September 3rd, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, approved and postponed to September 3rd. We now come to public hearings, and there are 4 public hearings tonight. To speak during public hearings, you need not have signed up in advance. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. Speakers may only address the subject of the public hearing and may not grant any of their time to another speaker. You may speak only once on this topic. If there are multiple speakers, please form queues at either side of the council chambers and kindly provide the courtesy of allowing all speakers to be heard. Finally, if you require assistance while speaking for council, we would be happy to provide it. The first public hearing tonight is an ordinance to amend Section 515, Table 515, 517.3, 517.5, Table 5:17.5, and Section 3.37.2 of Chapter 55, Unified Development Code of Title V of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor, Permitted Use Table, Parkland Donations, Dimensional Standards Table, Front Lot Line. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no other speakers, this public hearing is closed. Public hearing number 2 is an ordinance to amend the zoning map, being a part of Section 5:10.2 of Chapter 55 of Title V of the Code of Ann Arbor, rezoning of 2/10 of an acre from C1B Community Convenience Center District to C1A Campus Business District with conditions. The Garnet rezoning, 325 East Summit Street. I should mention that the developer for the Garnet has requested postponement of the zoning and site plan. I don't know for sure if that will happen tonight, but I did want to mention it so the folks who came to speak are aware that these 2 agenda items may be postponed. Having said that, is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing?
Thank you. My name is Ethel Potts. As you all know, each parcel of land in the city is zoned for a reason, mostly so they conform to an area plan or a master plan, so they will be developed suitably with no negative impacts on surrounding parcels or neighborhoods. But to keep a zoning, keep a continuous zoning, gives stability and predictability to a neighborhood. No one of us wants a surprise when we discover there's a different kind of development next door to us or across the street. A zoning change could be justified if it were to correct a problem, but no problem has been mentioned, only changes to a long-time historic district. C1A sets standard, as it's in the zoning ordinance, sets standards intended for campus residential and shopping areas of the city. This is written into the code. 325 Summit is quite a different kind of neighborhood. It's charming old houses. It has Wheeler Park, the train station, and Broadway Bridge. It's the historic NCPOA, North Central neighborhood is what it is. C1A zoning does not require the 10-foot front setback that we presently have in the C1B zoning. the C1A zoning would have us give up also a building height limit. So this is setbacks and height limits, which are now in effect, which would not be with the new zoning. The petitioner may want to tweak the proposal for a later decision, but no small changes will make CIA a workable zoning. A no vote tonight will prevent a wrong zoning.
Thank you.
My name is John Rasmussen. I have lived in this neighborhood beginning back in 1960 at 505 North Division Street, 1 block from this property. For approximately the past 9 or 10 years, I have an office for a not-for-profit which is located directly adjacent to this site. I have seen the alley deteriorated because the paving has not been repaired. If this building is built, they will repave the alley. The density increased in that site allows people to walk to Carytown, to Zingerman's for coffee, or to the farmer's market, and which I do on a daily basis. The building there is not a historic building. Garnet Johnson has been responsible for the development of 2 family buildings, basically, in that neighborhood going back more than 20 or 30 years, and things she's done to improve the building. This building will be a benefit to the community. People will be able to walk to Carytown, be able to walk to the farmer's market, walk to work downtown. I worked at City Hall back then, and I walked here. And I think it would be an improvement for the neighborhood. The house is not a historic house. It's been modified. It's not historic. I favor a positive vote on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jeff Crockett. I live at 506 East Kingsley. And I want to make clear that this is not an historic property issue at all. It's a zoning issue. And EPI sort of really clarifies that this is not really a campus business district. And basically, it brings to the question of what is. So, I mean, this is a map of all the university-owned properties. So if you say that this is a campus business district, what about all the other university properties on this map? This opens up a huge loophole because this is not really well defined. And it would seem to me that the business department, or the planning department, before we consider applying a zoning category to this particular property, really needs to clarify under where these campus business districts are. Because right now, this is sort of equivalent to fuzzy math. It's fuzzy zoning. And we need to understand exactly what we're talking about before we approve it. The other thing is here, what exactly is the public benefit? The goal, as I understand in Ann Arbor, is to try to improve basically affordable housing. So these units at $450 a square foot, according to an MLive article, will vary between $495,000 and $810,000. So exactly who can afford these, units for the benefit that we're trying to give them? Well, it's mostly wealthy folks, okay? It's not the people we're trying to help, which is workforce housing and less. So there's really not much of a public benefit to this at all. So what this is really about is upzoning. And there's clearly a movement from some of the members here at council to upzone. The question is that there's a movement to upzone everywhere. So this is sort of like letting the camel get its nose into the tent. And what happens? Well, soon you have the camel inside the tent. You've basically granted this little exception to the zoning, but it opens the door to a whole bunch of other developers who also want to increase density near university housing to do the same. And how can you deny them if you grant this? So I would encourage you to not allow this spot zoning and instead delay and find out from the planning department exactly what the campus business district not only was intended to do, but what it currently should apply to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Chris Crockett. My husband Jeff and I have already submitted a letter to you, but I'd like to say a few words about this project also. Kelly Anderson, the developer, met with me a number of months ago about this particular project, and I understood at that time that it was going to be a luxury development. Although that made me uncomfortable, I had no objection to it. That's what she was planning, and it's her right to build a luxury development, even though I'd like to see more affordable housing. At the same time, during that meeting, I specifically asked if there was any need for any kind of zoning change or any kind of variance. She assured me none was needed to achieve the building that she presented to me at that time. We had no later meeting on that building. So what she presented was, I thought, what was going to be presented to you. As it turned out, that was not so. You were presented with a larger building and asked for a different zoning, even though she assured me that nothing like this was necessary. The campus business district housing has been construed by some as acceptable because this is close to the campus. The closest campus buildings are a half a mile in one case, that's the nursing school. That building is a half a mile away, and the Kellogg Eye Center is more than a half a mile away. So if you use that measure, then you could have the whole city of Ann Arbor pretty much zoned, spot zoned campus business district, because we have U of M buildings all over town. This is not acceptable. I think what we need to do, and what the developer needs to do, if a larger building is desired, is to go for a PUD and to present a public benefit at the same time. I have no objection to there being a new building on this site, and I told Kelly Anderson that when I met with her. I supported it. I do not support this change of zoning, because setting this precedent whereby any site within a half a mile of a university building can be rezoned campus business district with no height limits endangers the entire community. I urge you to please turn this down and to urge the developer, if they want a larger building, to go with a PUD where there is a specified public benefit. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to address council at this public hearing?
Good evening. My name is David Silkworth. I'm a resident of the Fifth Ward. I'm here tonight to discuss agenda item B2, or the Garnet rezoning. I urge all of you to reject the spot rezoning of this parcel from C1B, Community Convenience Center, to C1A, Campus Business, because it's a misapplication of our zoning laws and a clear deviation from our master plan. Chapter 7, the center area section of the City of Ann Arbor Master Plan land use element, provides for higher development densities and a wider variety of building uses inside our urban core. This is intended to promote a healthy downtown commercial business environment and to accommodate the residential, service, and entertainment needs of downtown residents, which in some areas includes a lot of University of Michigan students. This plan calls for a very dense urban core designated by D1 and D2, but it also calls for buffer or transition areas between the densest urban core areas and the surrounding established residential neighborhoods, which are intended to ensure their continued viability. Campus business zoning designations of C1A and C1AR were intended to be used in various locations around the University of Michigan's central campus, adjacent to some of the densest urban core areas of our city. These campus business zoning designations were not intended to be used outside of those areas, and any proposed use of them outside of those areas is a clear misapplication of the zoning and a violation of the stated goals of our master plan. Continued misapplication of C1 and C1AR zoning could be harmful to other neighborhoods around University of Michigan properties because it could establish a legal precedent that could be difficult for the city to defend against if additional similar speculative rezoning requests are made in the future. A few days ago, I sent an email to all of you citing many of the goals and objectives stated in the central area portion of the city's master plan land use element. And while that list is too long to recite at this time, the ability of this property's current zoning to conform to those goals and objectives is all that you should consider when deliberating this rezoning request. Because all of the goals in the central area can be reached using the current zoning for this property, there is absolutely no reason to approve this rezoning at this time. Our zoning laws must be followed, and our master plan must be adhered to because they have provided the stable foundation upon which our city's prosperity both has been and will continue to be built. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this public hearing?
Hi, my name is Edward Vilmetti. Several of the comments tonight have been regarding the expansion and use in the city of a campus business district. And I, for one, think that's a fine idea. I'd like to see use of an existing zoning plan that is designed to meet the needs not only of students, but also people who work at the university and other people who are affiliated with the university, allow us to get some increased density in places that are as little as a half a mile away from university properties. Literally, you can see the university from your front porch if your front porch is constructed carefully. I think the sort of misunderstanding that a campus business district is only what it was in the 60s or 70s, I think that's a backward-looking perspective. The university has grown immensely. The university provides a remarkable amount of economic vitality to this town, and city zoning should not be used to prevent the sort of increased density and natural growth that come when you have a dynamic source of that growth potential in your town. Furthermore, you know, as it has been discussed, the footprint of the university has grown quite a bit, stretching all the way, you know, easily without working too hard from Briarwood all the way to East Ann Arbor, up Plymouth Road. So this gives us an opportunity to reevaluate some of our decisions that were made when that land was private business or farmland. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. You may have questions as to whether the campus business district zoning is well constructed. There's probably perfectly reasonable changes that could be made to modernize that. Heaven knows our zoning code has all sorts of old think about things that we would probably want to change if we could change them. But applying it widely across town, I think, gives us some flexibility that would be worth doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this public hearing?
Good evening. Really, I was not planning to speak, but my name is Julie Ritter. I live at 920 Catherine, and I really don't know a lot about this. I haven't been paying too much attention to it, but just listening to people tonight. I'm coming here because I'm on the committee to help identify the consultants for the new master plan. And there's been a lot of different conversations, different levels of conversations, but one of the things that have been talked about is to get away from zoning-specific parcels and have character overlays or something of that nature in the future master plan instead of zoning each different parcel separately. There's a lot more emphasis on neighborhoods and on the area that it's surrounding. This is not a downtown campus neighborhood. This is Wheeler Park. It's by the river. Everybody, I don't have to go into all that. Everybody's done a great deal of explanation. But if this is, as I read someplace, like a developer's last push to get in that one zoning change before the new master plan goes into effect, it's pretty depressing, because if you're going to approve this, why have zoning at all? Why bother having zoning if every time a developer comes up and wants to upzone a parcel, you approve it, even if it has nothing to do with the neighborhood character? And I think I better stop now. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this public hearing?
Hi, Karen White, Ward 3. I also think that it would be a mistake to rezone the Garnet parcel in this manner. I've been trying to educate myself about how citizens get involved with the zoning process and the master planning process, and this seems to subvert the democratic participation that should be at the heart of that. I agree with Christine Crockett, it should be a PUD. I have no problem with a high-density luxury development, but I do have a problem with them using this weird designation to spot zone to try to get that. I think they should come at it the way the process should work, and that way participants, citizens get to participate. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this public hearing?
Mark Corey speaking again. I think the points the mayor are very well taken. I see it too often. Campus business district is not an appropriate designation, I believe, from what everybody has said, and I think it's a misuse. And I think we should just try to follow the proper intent of the ordinance, rather than to use this corruption of the zoning, spot zone, to do it do it as planned. So I would incorporate the arguments of some of the prior speakers, such as Ms. Crockett, such as Ms. Potts, in that respect. Thank you.
Thank you. And is there anyone else? Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, members of the Ann Arbor City Council, for your service and dedication to our community. My name is Victoria Pebbles, and I'm here on behalf of the petitioner team. I'm not going to get into details about zoning. We have other folks who can get into that, but I just want to describe for you and the audience, remind you that the Garnet is a small project. The whole site is only just over 8,500 square feet. That's less than 1/5 of an acre. And while it may not be designated as the core area, it's really close to where there's a lot of other activity going on. There's development going on proposed across the riverfront. And we're trying to do this in the most sustainable way possible. We are offering conditions to limit the height at an average of 57 feet. We do conform to the master plan, as has been previously documented in the responses provided to city council members. And it's really the smallest size building and redevelopment that is economical for this particular site. And when I talk about the redevelopment, this isn't just an average site. It has a history there. It was part of a coal gasification plant many years ago, and we are working very diligently to come up with a cleanup plan that is part of this and that can keep that cleanup costs out of the city coffers. It's also supportive of the current anticipated commercial uses, including Carytown. But I'd like to come back to the cleanup piece, because that is a public benefit. If we weren't going to clean that up, then who would that go to? I offer that for your consideration. So there are benefits of certainly affordable housing is something I know that's important to the city, but isn't environmental sustainability also important? We heard that mentioned by at least one council person this evening. So we have completed a baseline environmental assessment. We've been working for more than a year to come up with a cleanup plan. We've met with DEQ and other folks, formerly DEQ, now Eagle, to come up with a plan that's workable, that will clean it up. And it is a residential use, so it is consistent with other uses in the immediate area, the types of comments that were made earlier about character in the neighborhood. Our design is also very sensitive to the historic look and feel of the neighborhood. I encourage you to look at it if you haven't yet. And also, I'm very pleased and excited because there are many residents and businesses that we've talked to who have expressed a lot of excitement about the redevelopment of this site and the potential new opportunities this building will offer for the neighborhood. I'd be delighted to provide more information about our project, and I urge you to vote in favor of postponing the decision until we can get you that information so you can make it on the best available information. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this public hearing?
Good evening, Brad Moore, architect for the project. I'd like to address a couple points tonight. The first is the idea that requesting C1A conditionally is a spot zoning. Spot zoning is not the applicable term here because we are not being provided or asking for any uses which are not already permitted on the site. We're asking for a different flavor of C1 zoning. Currently it's C1B, and we're asking for a C1A with conditions. So the idea that the zoning is being changed to allow uses that don't pre-exist is not correct. With respect to the purpose of the C1A zoning district, in the very first sentence in the zoning ordinance, it talks about what the primary use of the district is. And I want to suggest that you should not conflate exclusivity to primary. Primary means maybe the first and foremost, but it doesn't exclude secondary, tertiary, quaternary, maybe even nonary uses. Those other uses are enumerated in the other permitted principal conditions in the district. So just because the district is principally for one thing does not exclude it doing other things that are permitted under the code. The idea that the C1A has the potential for proliferating throughout the city is something I also want to address. In that statement of the district's intent, the one thing that it absolutely says that must happen is it has to be close to the central area of the city. It doesn't say it has to be close to campus. That's nowhere laid out in the requirements, but it does say it has to be close to the central area of the city, which has generally been viewed in other documents to be the DDA boundaries. And our site is only one long block from the DDA. So the idea that C1A would be acceptable on Plymouth Road or other places doesn't comport with the requirement in the zoning that it be close to the central area of the city. Our setbacks have been crafted so that we are nearly 100% in compliance. The unusual geometry of the site, because of a steep acute angle where it joins Beeks, means that we have a slight decrease in the 10-foot setback at that corner, but the average along Beeks is 13.5 feet, which is much greater than is required. We'll be here to answer any other additional questions. We hope you will give us a chance to develop additional information that's been requested and vote to table it tonight so we can come back with that additional information.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this public hearing?
Hello, Council. My name is Jeff Mahaney. I represent the development group. And I just want to say I'm super excited about this project. I live in California. I've lived in small towns. I currently live in a town about the size, about 1,500 people. I've lived in the city of San Francisco. I've lived in Oakland, and I grew up in St. Louis. So I've been in all of these different areas, and I have to say that even as a young person, I was always paying attention to what was happening around me. And although I design residences myself, I'm always very cognizant and aware of what's happening in my environment around me. When Kelly asked me to be part of this project, I was excited about it just by the description. Once I came here to Ann Arbor and I had the opportunity to truly understand the setting, the place, this city, I was really, really excited about it. I see things, and I'd like to believe that I want to be part of very responsible things. I believe this project is incredibly responsible. I've been part of these negotiations on cleaning up the site and diligent at working to make that happen and not have it come out of the Ann Arbor's coffers. I feel like it's really important that a place like this, in my mind, is a very interesting neighborhood. It's in transition with the riverfront development that's going to take place there. I believe Ann Arbor and Carytown are going to feel more connected to this general area. I believe this project is actually quite respectful, not only to the history of Carytown and the way that it looks, but in its scale, that it's a residential scale. Yes, it's multiple units, but I believe that it has a true respect for this neighborhood. I personally, if I were moving to Ann Arbor, would want to live in this area. I'd want to be able to walk to Carytown. I would want to be able to get to campus by bicycle or walking. I personally feel like it's extremely close to the University of Michigan and tied to it. I really feel like that I want to make it really, really clear that I think one of the neighbors that stood up had a conversation with Kelly very early on in the project when we were still under the impression that the alley, which is part of our, adjacent to our property, was going to be part of what we were going to be able to use to develop this property. I don't want to get into details, it's not important, but I think there might have been some misunderstanding, so I know we're happy to reach out and help get to a better understanding there. I think the last thing is we would really appreciate the opportunity to present these massing drawings and hopefully help convince any council members who are right on the fence about this that it is the right project at the right time in the right place, and it's respectful to Ann Arbor. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this public hearing?
Hello, I'm Kathy Kyneth with Macon Engineering, and I prepared the site plan for this project. And I just wanted to give you some brief points to consider when we're looking at the benefits that this project brings to the city from a site plan perspective. First of all, of course, is the improvements to the alley. The alley's in terrible condition, and it will be improved. We're providing more bicycle parking than is required, a substantial amount more. We're providing more vehicular parking than is required, and most importantly is the environmental cleanup. That site currently has absolutely no stormwater management on it at all. All of that water infiltrates into the contaminated ground and spreads uncontrolled right now. This project proposes cleaning up that site and improving it with a stormwater management system that will include a green roof to meet all of the city's requirements. So we would really appreciate if you would consider giving us the extra time to prepare the extra materials so that we can present it to you for your very careful consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this public hearing?
Good evening. I'm Tom Stolberg, 1202 Traver Street. Tonight, on social media, in the newspaper, the last time you talked about this, at Planning Commission, the best things I've heard about this project are the building and the site plan. And some of the things that neighbors have said and supported this project for. But the worst things about this project aren't site plan, they're zoning. And right now, we're talking about zoning. This public hearing and the vote are about zoning. This is simply not how zoning is done. Campus business district zoning is not appropriate for this location. It is not appropriate in character for this area either. It is a core area zoning. It's designed that way. Contrary to what somebody else said, the planning documents for years, including studies in the 80s, and our ATD2 process all talk about core area characters. C1A and C1AR are core character zoning categories and do not belong outside the core or at the edge of the core as a transition. We are killing our transitional zoning that we set up with D2 transition if we approve this project. This does let in higher intensity development outside of our D2 transition zoning. Just across the street from this project is two two-story houses, a two-story apartment, and behind them another couple two-story houses. That's zoned residential, master plan residential, I believe it's R4C. With C1AR comes its companion zoning category, with C1A comes its companion residential zoning category, C1AR. Those properties would be right for C1AR and a tear down of those properties and building of a skyscraper, a downtown height, high-rise building right across the street from this, enabled by this rezoning that you're considering right now. This is fuzzy zoning. Essentially, we're taking, in terms of trying to comply with the master plan, we're taking a commercially zoned project, we're rezoning it to another commercial category. It's going to have 100% residential use, which is a permitted use, but it's not the intended use of the zoning category. And so is that compatible with the master plan because it's commercially zoned but residentially used? And we're going to put conditions on it to make it 100% residential and keep it that way. So again, is that compatible with the master plan being commercial when it's really residential? What is it? Is it residential or is it commercial? Is that clear? Let's go even further. Setbacks are different. If you have a commercial building next to a residential building, which setback do you use here? You can kind of see how fuzzy this whole thing is. Please just deny it tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no other speakers, this public hearing is closed. Public hearing number 3 is the resolution to approve the Garnet Site Plan and Development Agreement, 325 East Summit Street. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing?
I'd like to address a couple of things. One is that the fact that our proposal is not just C1, it's a conditional C1A. So the conditions that are being imposed are not just in the residential use, they're also on the maximum FAR that could be achieved, and also the maximum height on the project. So the idea that we're going to open the door to something that would be tall as a downtown building is not quite correct. If you look in the C1AR tables on the zoning ordinance, you'll see that in theory, it has a 400% maximum FAR with premiums. But that's a premium total that's unachievable because of the limits in what premiums are available to the C1A zoning district. In the D1 and D2, there are a whole bunch of different premiums that are available that are denied to the C1A zoning district. As a matter of fact, the most you can get, if you were to provide the maximum amount of pedestrian amenities, is 8,000 square feet. So on a site that was 8,000 square feet, that would only be 100% additional FAR. So you're not going to achieve the theoretical maximum of 400% FAR, even if you didn't have conditions applied to it, and we're offering conditions. Furthermore, taking a residentially zoned piece of land and asking for commercial is spot zoning, because you're allowing a different set of uses on a parcel that didn't predate the zoning request. So the idea that you would try to take residential zoning and change it to commercial zoning is a misnomer. It's not what the project is about at all. And there was also a comment about the necessity of this having some juxtaposition to the university, and I want to reiterate that that is only a primary use in the district, not its sole use.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this public hearing?
Considering that we've all been talking about the zoning, which is the main thing that's been on so far, I think it's a little premature to deal with the site plan or the development agreement. I think we need to know what the zoning is and is going to be for this project first. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no other speakers, this public hearing is closed. Public hearing number 4 is an ordinance to amend Chapter 55 Unified Development Code zoning of 1.19 acres from Township District to R1A Single Family Dwelling District, the Downward Picasso property at 2705 Newport Road. Is there anyone who would like to speak at this public hearing? Seeing no speakers, this public hearing is closed. That concludes our public hearings tonight. Can someone please move the meeting minutes from the August 5th regular session and the August 12th special session? Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Grand. Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The minutes are approved. Ordinance's second reading. Ordinance to amend Section 515, Table 515, 5.17.3, 5.17.5, Table 5:17.5, and Section 5.37.2 of Chapter 55, Unified Development Code of Title V of the Code of the City of Ann Arbor, Permitted Use Table, Parkland Donations, Dimensional Standards Table, and Front Lot Line. Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Smith. Is there any discussion? All in favor, Councilmember Hayner.
Sorry, I was fixing my
That's
microphone.
okay.
I just had a question for, maybe Councilmember Ackerman could answer this, because you're sitting on planning. So we saw, we see that these tables that are set into our the UDC, and, small changes to these tables can result in kind of big changes in the built environment. Is there anything in here that stood out for you as unusual or, kind of out of line with what would be typical?
So ultimately, I want to defer to Mr. Leonard in case he has anything to say. Generally, these are actually, I mean, first of all, let me say you're entirely right, right? These tables hold a lot of power. And the purpose of this is to make sure any unintended changes from the transfer from Chapter 55 to the UDC are corrected to revert it back to the original intent. So this is essentially trying to solve the problem you just articulated of unintentionally, carrying forward changes that weren't supposed to get in there. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah. Good evening. My name is Brett Leonard. I'm the planning manager. Good evening, Mayor and Council. So I would say the most substantial change to these amendments being presented are the change to front lot line definition, specifically changing how we look at properties when they abut a highway. Currently, our front lot line regulations designate any public right-of-way. So technically, if you have a lot that backs up to US 23, for example, now we count that as a front yard. This would address that and address it as a rear yard. The only front would be the primary street to which the property is addressed. Other than that, as Councilmember Ackerman indicated, these are no changes that are going to have impacts. They're actually bringing forward our original requirements as adopted that were not incorporated in the first draft of the UDC that was adopted last year.
Is it okay to?
Yes, Councilmember
Okay,
Hayner.
thanks. So we have a local situation in Ward 1 where we have a public street that really is now functioning as a parking lot, and I think you're familiar with this. It's the Pontiac Street address that is on the north side of the North Side Grill. And, the parking lot that effectively runs between the North Side Grill and the old gas station is actually an addressed street. It's 1405 Pontiac Street or something like that. It's a city street. Does that have any effect on this? Would that be changed by these table changes?
If it were designated a street, as you indicated, then it would not. If it is designated an alley, as I think it is, then we would no longer count the portions of the property that front that as a front yard. They would become side yards instead of front yards.
And does that have any effect on the use of the now abandoned gas station building?
It would reduce essentially the setback requirements from the building to that alley, but it wouldn't have any impact on the permitted uses at that location.
Yeah, I thought it was designated as alley, and then I went up to, I went upstairs to assessment and looked at one of the maps, and it's showing it's on there as a street, if you can believe that. And we actually repaved it some few years back as a part of the street repaving projects. So, there's some efforts to develop that building in that space, in that parking lot further. I just want to make sure that this wasn't going to strangle those efforts, because I think those folks have had a difficult time as it is getting through the system.
Yeah, if that were a street, it would have no change. If it were an alley, it would have the benefit of essentially providing more development area for those sites.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It passes. B2, ordinance to amend the zoning map being a part of Section 5:10.2 of Chapter 55 of Title 5 of the Code of Ann Arbor, rezoning of 2/10 of an acre from C1B, Community Convenience Center District, to C1A, Campus Business District, with conditions. The Garnet rezoning, 325 East Summit Street. Moved by Councilmember Griswold, seconded by Councilmember Bannister. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Hayner.
Thanks, I'll start. I did see that a letter got circulated around asking for I don't know if it was for the site plan to be postponed or for this rezoning to be postponed. I didn't have a chance to read it fully. I wasn't going to plan on bringing that forward in any event. I'm happy to comment on the rezoning
both.
aspect. It was both?
Correct.
All right, well, let me talk about what I was going to say about the rezoning. I appreciate everybody coming down here and speaking to it, and the developers also speaking to it. And I had some concerns that were addressed or at least spoken to at the very end. The development agreement for the site plan under this rezoning is, in section P14, is pretty weak when we talk about I have several concerns about this parcel. Not least among them is the pollution that exists on this parcel. And so I don't know if you folks have been up there, but there's about a dozen monitoring wells on this site and the two adjacent sites. And they're official. They have well monitoring numbers, and it shows what they're looking for, if you care to look up the table. And it's a lot. And so there's definitely a contamination situation on this site. And I was kind of startled to see that in the development agreement, as part of this rezoning, it was referred to as a sump, and so those waters are collecting in the sump, and then they're getting kicked into the storm drain and thereby directly into the river. And so this is an ongoing spread of this contamination, and in speaking with some of the adjacent property owners this afternoon, they expressed the same concerns, and they've been trying to reach out to DEQ Eagle to see what's going to happen with that. And one of the gentlemen told me that DEQ wants to come in and remove 4 feet of topsoil below the current grade and replace it on his parcel, and this is a parcel immediately downstream of this one. So I have concerns that this has been allowed to go on so long. And now, when we talk about increased density on this site, and that's what this would do, it would allow increased density and redevelopment of it. I often think that if density is a means, what's the destination? Are we increasing density for a purpose to go with our master plan? Are we increasing density because we believe that supply and demand is such a simple concept that more supply is going to meet our affordable housing goals? And we see that it's not the case with this one. There's nothing considered affordable about this. But my big objection to this is an echo of what many people spoke to, and that's that this is a zoning change, and zoning changes are based on law and need and not wishful thinking. And my concerns about this are that when someone comes to us and City Council and asks for a zoning change to allow a project to move forward that is not the project that is available under the current zoning, I think it's incumbent on us to look at that as an opportunity to look at what are our goals as a city when it comes to developing these various parcels. Are they in keeping solely with the master plan, which says that, that this area should be what it is now, which is a near business area, sort of a low-key mixed use? Are they affordable housing goals? What is the public benefit? And I know that the developer spoke to the idea that this public benefit is that they're going to somehow clean this up, and then the city's not going to get stuck with the bill. And as a person who's very interested in the safety of our waters and our Great Lakes waters, I'm concerned that this has gone on this long without an effort to clean it up. And so I don't see that cleanup as a public benefit necessarily commensurate with the granting of this rezoning. I think that when you ask the city to rezone something, that you have to demonstrate a need. And it's not, no offense to personal property rights or development, but the need isn't to shift your bottom line around so that you can profit off of this. The need is the city's need and the needs for the city's goals. And I mean, I was told all the way up to today from when I decided to run for city council that the city has an affordable housing problem, and we are looking to create mixed-use neighborhoods that reduce reliance on motor vehicles and things. And so by rezoning this, we're throwing both those things away. And so it's not suitable for me to allow this rezoning. It's a rezoning request should be a carrot that we dangle in front of people to get what we want. And I don't see that in this case. This isn't what, I don't believe this is what our master plan wants. I don't believe this is the direction we're headed in. And right on the eve of a new master plan, as Ms. Ritter pointed out, perhaps this isn't the type of decision we should be making right now. There's no need for it. There's been no need demonstrated to me. So I can't support this rezoning, I'm sorry to say, to those who do.
Thank you, Councilmember Hayner. I would just ask at this point, because the developer has requested a postponement until council's September 16th meeting, if, before we continue this discussion at this point, if any council member would like to make a motion for postponement. Moved by Councilmember Smith, supported by Councilmember Nelson. Any discussion of the postponement? Councilmember Eaton. September 16th was the request.
So I appreciate that the developer has asked to postpone this to give them time to provide the drawings that you asked for some time ago. But I don't think that the set of drawings that we're likely to get will be determinative of whether or not we should grant the rezoning. I think that it's more germane to the issue of the site plan. And I don't necessarily oppose this particular building, but I do very vigorously oppose the use of campus business district zoning in this location. So I don't believe that there's any reason to postpone the zoning decision for drawings that really relate mostly to the site plan decision. And so I would hope that we don't postpone it, that we vote on the zoning and determine whether this particular location is suitable for this particular zoning district, which I don't believe it is.
Thank you. Further discussion to the postponement. Councilmember Ackerman?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I want to insert a slight wrench into that, Councilmember Eaton. I think when dealing with conditional rezonings, there are a number of different conditions that can be put in, and it's important for the public to understand that conditions have to be volunteered by the developer. They're not things that we can ask for under state law. Other proposals that we've come across that deal with conditional rezonings have offered stronger conditions. So if we were to postpone, I'd also look to the developer to see what additional conditions they may use as their own team and perhaps volunteer here. And so in that, there's the potential of intrinsically linking site plan to rezoning in a way that I think creates a better proposal for our consideration and more certainties to the community, potentially, obviously, because it has to be their decision, the developer that is. Inserting that into the conversation, I think postponement would be applicable to both the rezoning and the site plan. And I think September 16th, if that's something they do come back to us with, that that's just a better proposal for us to consider whether or not we vote it up or down.
Thank you, Councilmember Ackerman. Councilmember Hayner, to the postponement.
Yes, I'm wondering if there's any consideration that the cleanup agreement could be hatched out between now and then, because that would be something that I would be most interested in seeing. I don't know who would answer that, but
Perhaps that's a question to be answered by Mr. Leonard or the petitioner.
terrific, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leonard.
Well, I mean, since we're considering postponing to give additional time to get things together, that's one of the things that's missing.
So from the city perspective, since as we don't have specific regulations, cleanup standards set at the city apart from the state, what we could do, I think, is to refine that any proposed language in the development agreement to add some more detail about how that cleanup would be conducted under the state oversight. It wouldn't necessarily interject any local standards, but we could certainly do our best to try to clarify what expectations the state would be holding to that site and what the end result would be anticipated.
Should I or someone else look up the codes on these monitoring wells to see what just has been being monitored there? Does that shed any light on the situation?
I mean, that would be something that we could consult with the state on. They're the regulatory agency for contamination, so I would start from that realm, and then certainly leave it to the petitioner if they have any more specific information about that approach.
Oh, okay.
Excuse me. Well, he's up here,
yes.
can I ask him a
Councilor
question?
Breeden, of course.
So those issues being addressed in the development agreement could be done independent of the decision on the zoning. This project could come back with a different zoning classification, and we could still address those concerns about the pollution on the site and the other concerns that we have about the development.
Yes, so long as the eventual site plan that's considered is compatible with the zoning district, whatever that is proposed.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will, Mr. Moore, anybody, council members have any objections to Mr. Moore addressing this question? Thank you, Mr. Moore.
Yeah, I just wanted to address two things. We would like more time to work with staff to perhaps amend the conditions to more closely follow the environmental cleanup procedures and levels of the site. To Councilman Hayner's point about the stormwater and the sump pump, this site, if used for residential purposes, has to be cleaned up to a higher standard than if it were put to commercial uses. So by using it as a residential use, there's a better level of cleanup, number one. Number two, the sump pump that you were describing is at the level of the lower basement slab. The contaminated material would be removed below that level, and then clean fill brought in on top. So the water that would theoretically percolate down through the soils to reach that sump pump would not be going through the contaminated soils, but by the fresh soil that would be brought to the site. So that sump pump isn't pumping out contaminants into the storm sewer.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Hayner, again. Mr. Moore, could you return to the podium, please? Sorry. Here's Councilmember Hayner has another question.
So the sump pump
for you.
that's referred to in the P14, that's the future sump pump.
Correct.
So what's going on right now on the site? Nothing?
I don't have any familiarity with the existing
okay.
building.
Mr. Leonard, I think.
All right.
Can you respond to Councilmember Hayner's question?
Yeah, again, I don't know detailed about those monitoring wells and what they're being utilized for. Relative to this, there was an agenda question that I'll just reiterate, is that the language, I think you might be feeling some conflict on the proposed project is going to clean up the site, but we have this language that says we still have the option if we identify something. And simply the reason for that is contamination underground doesn't follow property boundaries. And so we want to make sure that while they're taking all the necessary steps within their control and purview of their property, that if in the future we identify some problem because of offsite or other ancillary impacts to that stormwater system, we want the ability to be able to respond to it via this system.
I think that would be in keeping with the owner of 320 Depot, who had shared his concerns about the changes to the property affecting like when you get a grading permit, you can't foist stuff on your neighbors. So there are, I mean, that whole area is ready for a cleanup, obviously. We have a lot more water concerns than we let on here in the city, I'm sorry to say. And I'm glad they're brought to the forefront and that we're recognizing it and dealing with it.
Thank you. Councilmember Nelson.
I just want to say that I'm glad for the opportunity for a postponement. Since the last meeting, there's been sort of a flurry of emails around from our legal department in trying to understand what the ramifications of this particular rezone would be. And I'm encouraged by the possibility that this development will bring about cleanup. I share concerns expressed about us being on just the eve of a reassessment of our master plan. I think that these are compelling arguments to sort of give us pause. So I welcome the opportunity for a postponement so we can sort of have a clearer understanding of the situation.
Thank you. I will just say for me that I did not support the rezoning of first reading, and my position has not changed. The rezoning to C1A Campus Business District is, in my view, inappropriate for many reasons I'll get into if we don't postpone this tonight. But in some, Campus Business District is intended for business development to service the surrounding students in the campus area, and this proposal is neither a business nor in a campus area surrounded by a student population. Plus, I'm very concerned about the precedent-setting aspect of utilizing an inappropriate force-fit zoning classification for the purposes of density. Many of us expressed that concern on the Lower Town C1AR zoning, and guess what? Here's another one. The developer has requested a postponement until council's September 16th meeting. The stated intent of the postponement is to allow time for massing drawings and renderings to be completed and for the developer to contemplate further conditions. Certainly having these drawings will be informative, but actually they should have been provided earlier when requested by city staff, but the developer rejected that request. In terms of potential changes to the conditions, I don't know what the developer is contemplating, and changes to the conditions could be relevant, but I do not support the base C1A zoning regardless of the conditions attached to it. Typically, in the past, council has honored developers' requests for postponement, and I'm okay doing that if that's council's preference. I'm also okay taking a vote tonight. I know my position, and also if council is not going to approve the rezoning to C1A, it's probably better the developer know that sooner rather than later, so he and staff can go to work on more appropriate zoning if that's the developer's pleasure. So I'm comfortable either way on postponement. I appreciate hearing what other council members have had to say, and others may want to also chime in on this postponement. I do think that, the public benefit has been noted, and that is certainly, with PUD zoning, a public benefit must be identified, and public benefits are identifiable with this project. So knowing that, recognizing that, appreciating that, doesn't appear that a different rezoning classification would be problematic in that regard. Is there anyone else who would like to speak to the postponement? Okay, Councilmember Boudry will take a roll call vote. Councilmember Clerk, sorry. I demoted you. Sorry.
I'm not sure
My
you did.
apologies.
That is a demotion.
Sorry.
Councilmember Boudry.
Mayor Taylor is absent. Councilmember Eaton?
No.
Councilmember Nelson?
Yes.
Councilmember Smith?
Yes.
Councilmember Ramlawi?
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner?
No.
Councilmember Bannister?
No.
Councilmember Griswold?
No.
Councilmember Lum?
No.
Councilmember Grand?
Yes.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Yes.
Motion fails.
Okay, so to the main motion. Councilmember Bannister.
Yes. As some of you know, I've been meeting or met with the developers early on, and I hope I was helpful when we worked through some of the issues of the alley and things like that. And I've been polling my residents, Ward 1 residents with Councilmember Hayner. And as we saw tonight during the public comments, we had 10 people, 10 residents speak. 2 were for it and 8 were against it. And I want to clarify, it is not the building. Everyone seems happy with the building, very excited about the alley getting fixed, very excited about the environmental cleanup through the stormwater management, and overall pleased with the project. But aside from the project, the big problem that we heard tonight and that I have been hearing very intensely for weeks is that C1A zoning can be used to upzone other properties, and that has dire ramifications and consequences beyond this site. And that is what I've found through extensive research and discussion with a bunch of different people. And so for that reason, I cannot approve this site, representing the Ward 1 residents, as a C1A zoning, and I would encourage looking at other zoning options for this same building.
Thank you. Councilmember Ramlawi.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Been quiet all night, and I was hoping that the postponement would succeed, so we'd have more soak time. There's a lot to think about. And like my colleagues have said, there's been a lot of information going back and forth in the last week. But we have been reminded a few times tonight that this is about a zoning request and not a site plan or development agreement. So here we are deciding on that in the second reading. You have heard about the public benefit, and one is obviously the pollution. I do have concerns about that, but again, that'll have to be talked about and decided with a different vote. But the arguments being made that this would set precedent and have greater ramifications, I have a hard time believing that based on the legal advice that we've been given, that this would open the floodgates to the degree that we've been told it may happen. So I just don't see that. I'm not convinced that it's going to. We've been on council now for a year almost. New members, myself. We've had a lot of requests for zoning changes. And this is one that I'm going to go against what most people think I would say, and I support this. I think, we eventually have to say yes. This is a less than a quarter of an acre. It's near the core. It's near shopping. It's near the amenities. It's near major development. It's near the train station. I mean, to me, it does lend itself to the benefits that we want to see in our community. We want to see more walkability, less car dependency, cleanup of contaminated sites, more density. We need more housing stock. Yes, this doesn't bring us affordable housing, but if anyone has been in the building trades lately, they know it's not cheap to build. And you frankly ain't going to get affordable housing in many of these areas. That's the reality. Here we have an opportunity to provide some more units desperately needed. And the arguments against it do not persuade me to vote against. I am for this at this point, and I'd like to hear more, but right now, that's where I stand.
Thank you. Councilmember Griswold. Sorry, Zach.
Yeah, I want to restate that I am for this building, and given the benefits that were outlined tonight and the fact that it would qualify based on what we know for a PUD, why take the risk of using a different zoning? And so that's what it comes down to me, that it's an unnecessary risk that we don't have to take, and we still get an excellent building, we get the density without it.
Thank you. Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I would have appreciated a postponement. I think there could have been some more room for negotiation on the conditions, but I think, having to take my vote tonight, I'm a yes. This is, a 10-minute walk from the Kellogg Eye Center, a 7-minute walk from the nursing school, a 15-minute walk to the hospital and to the medical school. And then I actually really appreciated Councilmember Hayner's kind of frame of what is the need. And, a lot of things, if you've listened to me over the years, when talking about land use, the need comes to our housing market. And as you look over the last 10 years at the Ann Arbor area, the average home price has gone from about $200,000+ a year, between $200,000 and $210,000 a year, up to around $380. I'm sorry, not a year, just $200,000 a year. Nope, I did again, $200,000 period. To about $380,000. That's an increase of about 90%. That's almost double the cost of housing to purchase a home here in the Ann Arbor area. That's a staggering change over the course of 9-10 years. And I think the supply and demand argument, is a little too simplistic, but I think it's a big part of the puzzle. And when we talk about 10 for-sale units this close to the hospital and the price range that we're looking at, I mean, we're really talking about, these are likely going to be doctors who are living here. And when I think about the doctor's salary and I think about creating new housing opportunities for them, I'd rather that than doctors be, new doctors, people moving to this community, looking at our existing housing stock in the neighborhoods we have now. Because they're going to be able to buy in cash, they're going to be able to buy quickly, they're going to be able to buy over the asking. And I'd rather create new opportunities for new affluent people moving to this community, but instead of having them compete with people who make less than them in our outlying neighborhoods. And that's where I see the need is at every income level, we're increasing the number of jobs in this community. We just are. We're a community that has more jobs than we have people. And the university's hospital, where this is located in incredibly close proximity, is increasing their employment rapidly to the tune of tens of thousands or over 10,000. And that's real. And the new people that they employ are going to be highly paid, and they're going to be competing to buy the houses in the neighborhoods that we represent. And that's a scary notion, and I'd rather create new opportunity for them. I think, too, the need is cleaning this up. Unfortunately, we live in a state and a time where the best way to clean up contamination is often, one, it requires usually the building that exists to be torn down, and it usually requires a private developer to have some incentive. In this case, it's the incentive to have a residential use instead of a commercial or manufacturing use. And that incentive means that private dollars are going to be used to clean up something that's going into our public waterways. And I think that's a really good and important thing, because the situation right now is that rainwater is hitting the ground and pushing it into our sewer system, our stormwater system, pushing it into and out of the property into neighbors' properties. And that's a really serious and big risk that we'd be delaying. So for those two primary reasons, the effect on the housing market, even if just 10 units, that's 10 houses in neighborhoods that won't be affected or competed against, and the fact that we have real cleanup opportunity using private dollars.
Thank you. Councilmember Grand.
Thank you. I will also be supporting this unless I think that we may need to bring it back for reconsideration, and then I may be voting no to do that. So if I vote no, it's for that reason, and that reason only. We've been hearing a lot about, would this set precedent? I hope so, because it's a great development close to downtown, and it's the exact kind of infill that we want to be seeing. We've heard a lot at this table about, we like this building, it's attractive, it's providing housing. There's environmental cleanup, which is substantial. So the only way we get things cleaned up is typically to redevelop, and I don't even see that as unfortunate if it's meeting a community need in a way that the neighbors are excited about and benefits our community overall by providing housing. I think we also need to think about what this rezoning is actually asking. It's not asking to go from R1A or R1B to C1A. It's asking to go from C1B, which is Community Convenience Center. And I'd like to actually read the definition of what that is, because to me, this doesn't look like an upzone. It looks maybe in some cases, from a traffic standpoint, certainly a downzone. And, so maybe you could call it a lateral zone, but certainly not an upzone, because C1B says that this district is intended primarily to serve the needs of the surrounding community. This includes establishments that, although they primarily serve a surrounding neighborhood, could also serve a larger trade or service area. These districts tend to create greater environmental stresses than those uses permitted under C1. So that doesn't sound like an upzone to me. Even though goods or services offered might be in the convenience category or classification. Most people entering this district will come by automobile and typically park once. The economic welfare of merchandising activities in this district depends on moderate development of comparison shopping. Office building activities are compatible with the purpose of the district as long as adequate and convenient automobile parking can be provided for both the office and the retail merchandising activity. So when I think about what this is zoned for, this is zoned for high auto use, frequent stops, or office. So to turn something like this into 10 units of housing that encourages biking and walking and local shopping, to me, isn't an upzone. I think it's an appropriate use. And then when you pair that with the number of conditions, that means that this can never be, that's what conditional zoning is. It means that you can't turn this into a skyscraper. It doesn't set precedent. There are many steps that need to be taken to provide those conditions. So it's the developer offering restrictions on the zoning and on the building. So it's not, to me, this idea, and I agree with Councilmember Ramlawi on this one, that this isn't setting precedent. It's just trying to provide an attractive infill development that meets the needs of our community, cleans things up, and encourages non-motorized mobility.
Thank you. Councilmember Smith.
Maybe I can put a bookend on this. I think I'm not going to talk at length because Councilmember Ramlawi covered my feelings pretty accurately, and I don't think that I can improve on what he said. I think, I would just reiterate is this zoning change helps to accomplish a lot of the things that we say that we're for. At some point, we have to start saying yes to them. Otherwise, those are hollow promises and not genuine documents that we've created in our climate action plan, in our sustainability framework, in our commitments to different things. So I am supporting this, and I have no reservations about doing so.
Thank you. Councilmember Griswold?
Just so there's no confusion, I am for density. I am for this building. I am not for rezoning to C1A. I believe it's a risk that we don't need to take because this qualifies for a PUD. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Griswold. Councilmember Mlawi?
Thank you for the second time to speak. There's been a lot of calls to have this come back as a PUD, as if that is the answer to everything. It's not. And, you know, it has a lot of downside for the petitioner. The demands can be ongoing. It really has a hard time for the petitioner to wrap it around and know what their absolute costs are going to be and risk. We saw it yesterday, in fact, at caucus, when the petitioner for the Glen had to come back and go through the whole process for 5 small minor changes that improved the project, but yet they had to come back through the whole process again because it was done under a PUD. So we make it sound like a PUD is this great tool. It is for complex developments like the Mishkan site. But to ask somebody who's just building 10 units to go through all that, we're talking about costs. The costs are just going to keep going up if we keep putting more red tape around getting things done. So I just urge my colleagues here at this table to know eventually one day you're going to have to say yes. And you're not going to find the perfect development every single time. You know, so I just want to say that PUD is not the answer for all types of development.
Thank you, Councilmember Mlawi. I will just offer that I do recognize that developers do not like PUDs, primarily because of the negotiation aspect of it. When I served previously on city council, we did a lot of PUDs. And then for whatever reason, they just weren't utilized the way they were in prior years. One benefit I saw from PUDs is that throughout that period, we were routinely donating through this negotiation process that comes from a PUD process, or is part of it. We were donating to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. PUDs went away, and we saw those donations, those contributions disappear. For me, as I indicated a moment ago, I won't be supporting this rezoning tonight. There's really a lot wrong with this, in my view, rezoning, not the site plan as proposed. There's nothing scary about the site plan. The objections are zoning specific, not site plan specific. And for me, if you brought back the exact same site plan and didn't change a thing, I'd be good to go. It's the zoning. I agree with the residents we've heard from who've said approving this rezoning to C1A would be a significant mistake. It seems to me that when there is a rezoning, the principle should be to find the most appropriate classification, the best fit. Instead, the city is evolving to a menu approach for developers, focused not on best fit, but on permitted uses, which allows developers to maximize density and optimize their project without consideration of the master plan, land use recommendations, the surrounding uses, or the other benefits that would accrue to the city with more appropriate zoning. This rezoning request to C1A is a perfect example. As I mentioned, C1A Campus Business District is zoning intended for supporting businesses in a campus location, and this proposal is neither. It's a 100% residential project and not near Central Campus. Importantly, it's not consistent with the master plan. C1A is not appropriate and certainly not the best fit. However, since this obscure, not well-defined campus business district classification is now prominently on the menu and available to developers, thanks to the ill-advised, in my view, precedent of Broadway Lowertown, and since it has evolved to permit about any use one could imagine without the accompanying requirements of providing community benefits like affordable housing, It's not at all surprising to me that developers are proposing it. I was struck by the response to one of my questions, and I think, sorry, it really demonstrates what a farce this is. The question was about PUD or residential zoning rather than C1A, and it stated, quote, "Residential zoning would be challenging because of the master plan commercial designation," end quote. So how do we get around that challenge? Simple. We just give a 100% residential project a commercial zoning. I'm sorry, but that's just not how we should be doing things, and it's not consistent with the master plan. As one of the emails we received noted, approving this rezoning to C1A creates a huge loophole in our zoning. I agree with that sentiment. Although staff and our attorney's office suggest there's no precedent-setting aspect to this, it's the same thing that was said with Lower Town, I am very concerned about the precedent. If we support this inappropriate rezoning, I'm confident that will lead to more developers taking advantage of the opportunity, the loophole, and I don't believe that that's in the city's best long-term interest. So I'll be voting no on the rezoning. Thank you for listening. Any other council members? Councilmember Eaton.
I appreciate your explanation of your position. I would point out that after council approved C1AR zoning for the Lower Town project, Roxbury came forward and proposed using that same zoning classification for the DTE property. If we approve C1A for this property, we can expect that other developers will seek this zoning classification for pretty much any development that's within a half-mile of a university building. This is a zoning classification that has rarely been used in the last few decades. It clustered around South State Street and South University and areas like that at the core of the city, which have now been replaced by D1 and D2 zoning. It really probably doesn't have a place in our scheme of zoning. If this is the kind of project that we want to build, then we should develop a zoning district that is suitable for 10 apartments on a small lot in a mixed-use neighborhood. This campus area designation is inappropriate for this site, even though the building that is being proposed is not offensive to most of us on council. So I will be voting against this rezoning.
Thank you, Councilmember Eaton. Councilmember Bannister?
Yes, I was just wondering if it would be appropriate at all to ask staff to elaborate on, like to build on what Councilmember Ramlawi said about, oh, it's gonna be really cumbersome to ask this petitioner to go back and get a different zoning. I'm wondering how quickly, if Mr. Leonard would maybe illuminate us on how quickly this existing site plan could be turned around under a different zoning such as the PUD.
I guess I will answer it and ask if the Attorney McDonald can make sure that I'm not misstating. But I think that the City Council does have the authority to make modifications to a zoning request. There would be probably potentially some procedural impacts to how that appeared on your agenda if it was substantially different from what the current is. But I don't know that if you were considering a request from the petitioner or initiating another zoning in the context of this petition, that it would necessarily have to start over at the beginning of the process.
City Attorney McDonald?
I think that's generally correct. Because this is a zoning request on the part of the council could come up with a different zoning if it found that appropriate. If you, as you go forward though, once you vote on if you were to vote down this request today, that would end the process for this particular zoning, and the petitioner would have to start from the beginning of the process. I think if I understand Mr. Leonard's comments correctly, I think what he was referring to is the fact that if some other zoning was to come forward, that of course would require additional readings of the zoning, and you wouldn't be voting on that tonight. It would take place at a future meeting. after an additional first reading.
Councilmember Eaton.
So can I ask a follow-up question? Can we vote this zoning classification down, postpone the site plan, and ask that they come forward with a different zoning proposal, and come directly to us rather than going to the planning commission?
No.
That's a good.
Once you vote it down, that ends the process, and any subsequent recommendation would have to come through the planning commission following state law.
Councilmember Nelson.
So if voting it down ends the process, just full stop, you're saying that we would be empowered at this table to amend the zoning? Is that what you said?
Well, there's a petition in front of you, and you know, council has a decision to put zoning on the property. You certainly could do so if you wanted to suggest and I think the council maybe if I recall, this may have been done once or twice in the last 10 or 15 years or so, where someone for some reason suggests a slightly different or asks staff for other recommendations for the zoning. But as you know, there's no requirement for council to change the zoning at all. But there is a state-required process so that if there's a zoning recommendation that comes forward to the council, you can, you can approve it, you can deny it, you can modify it. However, once it's voted down, then it would require a new petition that would have to go to the planning commission and then come back to this body for final decision-making.
So I guess my question is piggybacking off of what Councilmember Bannister said about asking Mr. Leonard about the hurdles of a PUD. What I'm asking is, could someone on the fly at this table just say, I'm amending it to make it a PUD, and it doesn't have to revisit planning commission? The process could move forward just strictly from this table?
I think the issue with the PUD is it's site-specific, it requires benefits, it requires supplemental regulations, so there'd be really no way to do that tonight, because the findings that are, or I should say the standards that are built in the ordinance would have to be met, and that includes sort of requirements that are sort of written for the site that are responsive to the city's PUD standards. So no one could do that today. Certainly, there could be some additional discussion, or the matter could be postponed to entertain that. But certainly, any PUD, well, regardless, I'll just leave it at that, because I think that answers your question.
Councilmember Ackerman, question for Mr. McDonald?
Yeah, to follow up on Councilmember Nelson's question, so I guess procedurally, if there's been a motion to postpone, are we allowed to postpone again? And if not, can we move to table as an alternative? Because it sounds like we're working towards something that would become more palatable to people, and at least give the developer the option to work with those terms or not.
So, yes,
So,
that's a
yeah, I
question
mean,
for you.
can we move to postpone again? Or could we do a different postponement motion to a date uncertain? And that way.
Well,
I
I think
heard
your
you
rules,
ask if-
I think your rules require you to not table items, but to postpone them to specific dates. But I think, or if specific things to be met, I think a motion to table, you've had one motion to table, and a
No,
motion
to
to
postpone.
postpone, I could think somebody could make another motion to postpone an item, as I think that can be done at any time.
So in that case, I would move to postpone this to allow staff and the developer to discuss the feasibility of a PUD zoning.
Can we ask the developer whether they're willing to entertain our idea of?
Councilmember Eaton?
I mean, you've made
I-
a motion, and so I really need your permission to go forward with
All right, yeah, please, by all means.
You need to hear that there are no objections from council to call up Mr. Moore, and I'm hearing no objections, so Mr. Moore.
We would certainly entertain the postponement or tabling to engage with additional discussions with staff, yes,
on the issue of finding a different zoning classification.
if it's possible to do so, without having to go back through all the hoops again.
Okay.
And as long as you're there, how much time would you like that postponement to be to do that task?
So, we had requested to postpone it to the second reading in September. I don't know about how long you think the staff would have to be engaged in that process. You think it's doable by the second week in September, or second meeting in September? I'm not sure how busy staff is. They've got other things to do besides our.
Yeah, I believe that we could accommodate that if we're not talking about technical review changes to the actual physical layout. We're really talking about the regulatory framework in which that site plan has the potential to be considered. I think we could work to get that back to you at that same time frame.
Okay, thank you. Any
So
other
then
questions?
There's a
So,
motion.
yeah, so the motion would
Yeah.
be specifically to the second meeting in September.
Right. Councilmember Griswold to the motion?
Yes, just for clarification, so the motion is to postpone to explore other zoning.
Wait, I'm sorry to interrupt. We need a second. I don't believe.
I would second.
Oh, seconded by Councilmember Eaton. Continue, Councilmember Griswold. I'm sorry.
It is to explore other zoning, including a PUD. Is that correct?
Mr. Leonard is nodding yes in agreement.
Okay.
Any other discussion to this motion? Which is
I have a
Councilmember
question
Smith.
On the, talking about PUD, Mr. McDonald, looking at the PUD process, if that ends up being the avenue kind of taken or recommended, is there any way to kind of sidestep any of the five, required consecutive steps in the PUD process?
Well, and I think that's what I just wanted to make sure to bring that up. I think
Could you
it sounds
please
like the
first
motion.
enumerate the 5 steps for everyone?
Well, I don't,
Mr.
can't have
McDonald.
the PUD open.
Okay, sorry.
yeah.
So I'm just reading from the UDC, and this is on page, it's 5.29, point 1 on page 198.
Thanks.
The PUD process involves 5 consecutive steps: citizen participation, pre-application conference with staff, pre-petition conference with the planning commission, PUD zoning district review, and PUD site plan review. The pre-application conference occurs before the applicant submitted a formal application. Zoning district and site plan reviews occur after the applicant has submitted a formal application. PUD site plan review may occur only if the PUD zoning district has been approved and as required by this section, or the planning commission has approved an applicant's request for PUD zoning district PUD site plan approvals to be presented together at the same meeting per section 5.2910C3 below.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Smith. I see 2 staff who are primed to respond. I don't know who wants to take it first, Mr. McDonald, Mr. Leonard.
I simply, I simply wanted to say that I think the motion that stands on the table, which asks staff to look at other zoning, including PUDs, certainly would be fine. I just wanted to make the point that we're kind of moving into an area where we have not done that before.
Right.
There's never been a
It's new
modification
territory.
of this body here to a PUD. So I just wanted to make sure that resolution would allow us to explore the possibility and what procedure would be necessary. Regardless of the procedures that were read, we would want to just very carefully look at that as well as the state law, so that we could give, even if the petitioner wanted it, I didn't want the expectation of the body to be that it could come back at the next meeting as a PUD. It may require some more process, and so I just wanted to make sure that that was clear, so that there were clear expectations of
Okay,
what may
thank you.
happen.
That's helpful clarification. And Mr. Leonard?
I wanted to echo that, but from a slightly different angle. That's why I was nodding. I agree the motion as provided allows us some flexibility to look at what I am hearing the council is seeking to potentially accomplish. We might very well be able to look at ways to incorporate some of the desires that I'm hearing that a PUD would typically afford, but potentially through the current structure of a conditional zoning. So just to echo Attorney McDonald's comments, I think that giving us the opportunity to look at that, we will have the ability to both look at the PUD process and other avenues, but potentially to get to a very similar result.
Okay. Councilmember Grand?
Thank you. So this could, other zoning could potentially be an R4 something or other.
As indicated in my
As well.
agenda questions, I think that that would probably be more difficult to meet the intentions of the master plan. While this is a residential project, a commercial zoning district is more consistent with the master plan recommendations of a commercial office designation.
Okay. But given kind of the mixed uses in that neighborhood,
That,
That
again, I think that
might-
motion gives us some broad abilities to look at. And just to confirm what I'm hearing, I'm generally hearing support for the physical representation of this development, but perhaps a more restrictive regulatory framework to ensure that there's not unintended consequences after the rezoning.
okay, so there could be like an R4 with conditions or something, not PUD.
Again, I think that motion gives us a lot of flexibility to come back with a recommendation in consultation both with our, of course, our code and the petitioner.
Okay, thank you.
Any other, Councilmember
Just
Bannister?
briefly, this question might be more for Mr. McDonald. One other option would be if the petitioner would withdraw their request, the rezoning request tonight, and bring it back. Would that expedite things any more than this avenue we're heading down?
No, I don't believe the petitioner has the ability to withdraw. It's been submitted to the council. It's in front of the council for the council's decision. And so really, you have to take action, and that action has to be proactive, meaning approval, denial, postponement. If they, they certainly can agree or to participate in that process, but it's really up to the council to make that decision.
And when was the deadline then for them to, just for future reference, for a petitioner to withdraw something?
To withdraw, if they certainly, before this was placed on the council agenda, could have asked staff to postpone the matter and not place it on the agenda. And I think staff would have followed that request. But essentially, when something has been placed in front of the council, and especially when we've advertised public hearings, the city has customarily always moved forward with the process. Thus, the developer, in their letter to council asking for a postponement, they don't have the ability staff doesn't have the ability to process that postponement and pull it from the agenda. It's on council's agenda, and so therefore, you voted on that previously because the administration just doesn't pull an item from the council when it's requested by a third party such as the developer.
Okay, thanks.
Any other council members? Councilmember Malawi?
Thank you. Will this then go to first reading after, if it came back in some form? Because we're at second reading, and it's changed it to such a large degree that it would go back to first reading.
I think that potential exists. It would ultimately be determined by what any revisions look like. We'd work with the attorney's office in consultation. We wouldn't do it just for the sake of doing it, but if we thought that there was substantive change, we would probably recommend that. That would still be a much more expedited process than starting over again.
Thank you.
Any other council members? So, council, thank you very much. On B2, the ordinance to amend the zoning map and the motion before us to postpone to September 16th to explore other zoning options. Clerk Boudry, if you would take a roll call vote on the postponement.
Mayor Taylor, absent. Councilmember Eaton.
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Mlawi.
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner.
No.
Councilmember Bannister.
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold.
Yes.
Councilmember Lum.
Yes.
Councilmember Grand.
Yes.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Council will now take a brief, let's say 10-minute max recess. Well, not that too long. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Oh, so sweet, thank you.
so weird.
Thanks, Gabe. Thank you. Okay. B3, an ordinance to amend Chapter 55, Unified Development Code zoning of 1.19 acres from Township District to R1A, single-family dwelling district, the Herb Downward Picasso property at 2705 Newport Road. Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Griswold. Is there any discussion of B3? Should we take a roll call? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It passes. Ordinances at first reading. C1, an ordinance to amend Chapter 55 zoning, rezoning of .54 acres from, PUD, Planned Unit Development District to PUD, Planned Unit Development District, the Glen Mixed Use Development, PUD zoning and supplemental regulations, 201, 213, 215, 217 Glen Avenue, and 1025 East Ann Street. Moved by Councilmember Hayner, seconded by Councilmember Ackerman. Is there any discussion? Councilmember Hayner.
Just briefly, I'd like to point out that this is a situation where PUD has worked in a terrific way apparently for the applicant and the neighborhood. We get fine reports from the relationship the neighborhood has had, the Old Fourth Ward, with this applicant, and everybody seems to be looking forward to this fitting in there on this sort of long neglected site. And so I appreciate the small changes here, having to go back through the system. It's a shame that that's the way it goes. The state says so. And so, this is a project that it seems like everybody's looking forward to, and I think a fine example of using this planned unit development district appropriately.
Thank you. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It passes. DC1, motion to reconsider the August 5th, 2019 vote that defeated the resolution to proceed with a road reconfiguration pilot for Green Road from Burbank to Plymouth Road. Moved by Councilmember Ackerman, seconded by Councilmember Grand. Discussion. Councilmember Ackerman.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Obviously, on August 5th, 3 proposed road reconfigurations came before us, one on Earhart, one on Traverwood, one on Green. This one concerns Green Road. In our consideration of each of these, staff prepared for us a memo that outlined the potential benefits and the potential risks of each of these proposals. On Earhart and Traverwood, those memos skewed towards the potential benefits. And on Green, those benefits and potential risks were a bit more balanced as you enumerate them. During the conversation, our colleagues made compelling points that actually it took me from on the fence to voting against this reconfiguration sincerely. That said, over 2 days, as I was musing it, I heard very practical opposition at the council table, and hoping to do something that would be a positive move forward, try to make as many stakeholders happy as possible, and build some consensus at this table, which I feel like has been sometimes lacking. I wanted to approach staff about the possibility of redesigning any of these. As I learned, there were already some conversations happening, and I submitted some feedback, practical feedback about the plans, and then about a week later, got on a phone call with staff to review some revised plans, which I thought were appropriate and would be beneficial to discuss at this table. And that is when I sent an email alerting everyone that I'd be bringing this back. I also just noted in there that Obviously, voting on the new revised plans tonight would be irresponsible. I think it would be best to be done in another couple of weeks. So if this is brought back, I would almost immediately move to postpone it, to give us the necessary time to review the new revised plans, to talk about them with our constituents, in particular Councilmember Lum and Councilmember Griswold, and ask any questions of staff and engineering that we may have. So, I hope that this is taken as sincere. I hope this is something that we can work on, and focus on the proposal, and the potential benefits of the proposal. But I also don't think it'd be appropriate to do that tonight, simply because I don't think any of us have had enough time or consideration with the new plans. So that's my intent. Thank you.
Councilmember Griswold.
Yeah, I've met with staff and talked to staff, and I really appreciated that. And it's not my job to do the design, but it's definitely our jobs as policymakers to ask questions and convey some of the concerns of our constituents. So I'm just wondering, because I know that Raymond Hess is here, and he made reference to some new designs, but I haven't seen them yet. Are they forthcoming, or what's the status?
Mr. Hess?
Well, Raymond is coming up. I believe we've sent them, I sent them by email to all of council last week.
Yes.
I did.
After we met on Thursday?
Correct.
Before.
Before we met on Thursday. Oh, okay, I was looking
Yes.
for them on
Well, before
Legistar.
the last Thursday's meeting, yes. Mr. Hess, if you could please join us. Did you hear the question?
My understanding is, Raymond Hess, city staff. Madam Mayor Pro Tem, my understanding is consistent with the city administrator that I believe Councilmember Ackerman had sent out an email, and then that was followed shortly by a follow-up email by Administrator Lazarus with the design.
Councilmember Ramlawi.
Thank you. Can you briefly give us an update on what the revised plan is in that area, if
Can I-
possible?
can I-
I'm sorry.
If I may just, yeah, this is a process, if I may just note, the purpose of a reconsideration is to conduct a second vote on a specific proposal resolution. The redesign is not, because that is not what was presented on August 5th, that is not what is before us. This is, right now, you are just considering reconsideration of what was previously presented, council.
Fair enough, and I think I've asked for reconsideration before, and I've been given, the courtesy by my colleagues for that. So I do owe my colleagues for that.
Councilmember Eaton?
Because the intention of this is to bring back what we previously denied and then change it. I would much rather deny the reconsideration and ask staff to actually present that, those ideas to the meetings that Councilmember Griswold and others are having with staff. Formulate a plan for bringing it forward as a brand-new resolution, rather than as an attempt to amend a previously defeated resolution. And so
Thank you.
I think that would work better. It would give us the same amount of lead time to consider it. I'm not opposed to entertaining a different plan for that road, but I'm not sure that a motion for reconsideration is the appropriate way to do it, so I will be voting against the motion to reconsider.
Thank you, Councilmember Eaton. Because this is a Ward 2 project, I would just like to share my thoughts, if I may, and then I'll call on the rest of you. The purpose, again, of a reconsideration is to conduct a second vote on a specific proposal resolution, and I certainly respect a council member's right to do that. to change their vote on a specific proposal, but that is not the purpose here, so I won't be supporting the reconsideration, and I will explain. Councilmember Ackerman has indicated his intent is to postpone the item once it is placed back on the table to allow time to go back and study alternatives and perhaps bring back forward a new, different proposal. That's just not the proper process. A reconsideration is the tool to be used with regard to a specific proposal, to change one's vote on that specific proposal. Reconsideration is not the appropriate approach, as Councilmember Eaton just explained, to create a new, different, but related proposal at some point in the future, which again is the purpose here. If the desire is to study alternatives to the, Green Road Diet proposal that was rejected August 5th, and perhaps come back to council with a different proposal, the more appropriate and frankly much cleaner approach is to just come back to council with that new proposal if and when it's ready. So I will not be supporting reconsideration tonight. It just doesn't make sense to reconsider and keep alive a specific proposal when the purpose is to replace it with something else. If the reconsideration passes, and this item is placed back on the table, I'll also be voting against a postponement. In my view, postponing this item will just waste additional staff resources on what I view as a fundamentally flawed proposal. Precious resources, I'm quite sure, can be productively utilized on other pedestrian safety matters. There's already been a significant amount of staff time invested on the 3 road diet proposals, including this one on Green, resources to support the original reviews in June, then to support the referral back to the Transportation Committee, then back to Council August 5th, and then to support the special meetings called last week where no less than 8 staff members attended. The major concerns about this Green Road proposal is related to the reduction to 1 northbound lane and narrowing the lane in the area immediately north of Plymouth. This is the section near CVS where there's trust me, I'm out there every week, very heavy traffic and a number of on-off ramps coupled with frequent bus and large truck traffic, and we know there's 7 bus stops in and around this area. It's a section that generated most of the quote, this is I'm quoting staff, quote, characteristics discouraging a road diet, end quote. Staff had identified initially, and neighborhood pushback. Despite what others may have said, just 18% of the survey respondents supported this option C. In the alternative road diet proposal that surfaced in Mr. Lazarus's email August 14th, there's zero change to that area. It's still 1 narrowed vehicle lane from the Plymouth intersection northbound with a buffered bike lane. As I did August 5th, I ask you to drive this area during peak traffic time and tell me whether you think 1 narrowed northbound lane on Green immediately north of the Plymouth intersection will just cause, quote, friction, end quote, I'm using staff terminology in their description, or, quote, conflict, end quote, which is, again, a staff description. Or whether you think it may be a real safety risk for everyone, vehicles, cyclists, and pedestrians. And then ask yourself, as Councilmember Nelson did, whether you'd want to bike in this area. No, the proposal that surfaced last week makes a few tweaks by adding right turn lanes on Green, I have looked at it, on Green at Commonwealth in Burbank, but it does not at all address the primary concern. Also, it's worth mentioning the memo from the administrator, incorrectly indicated that this revised proposal of last week added back a southbound travel lane on Green, but that is not correct. The August 5th proposal already had 2 southbound travel lanes on Green. Sorry, I've gotten into the weeds on this one. In my opinion, and as much as we may not like it or may not want to acknowledge it, there are just some roads and sections where road diets are not appropriate, and this section of Green Road is one of them. And we can't forget that with all the new residential construction in northeast Ann Arbor, again, as some have described, over the recent years, we dropped a new little city in this part of town. The traffic volumes are only going to increase. It is ill-advised, in my view, to try and force an application of any concept, no matter how much we believe in the concept, where it just does not fit. And I believe that's the case here with a road diet on Green near Plymouth Road, near this intersection. And I fear it may not just be ill-advised, but it may be truly unsafe. So thank you for listening to me. It's an area Councilmember Griswold and I know very well, and we have a lot of, I will say, informed views on this matter. Councilmember Hayner.
And we're speaking to the motion to reconsider this,
Yes.
correct? So I'd just like to speak broadly and suggest that we are about to have this problem with a newly adopted motion to reconsider put forward by Councilwoman Nelson, if I'm not mistaken, because my understanding was that this is the same kind of situation here where, I mean, I voted for Traverwood, and because it seemed to improve safety. And then I've been hearing that in the conversations that there may be another approach that may even be, have a better improvements to safety on that street. And so just like we're doing here with Councilman Ackerman's suggestion, I think that's the same thing happened for both these. So I think we should treat them equally is all I'm saying. And if it's vote down this thing and have staff bring it back, then that's the way we should do it. I'm not sure, but I think we brought this upon ourselves by asking for this approval. This is the kind of thing that I believe in the past would have kind of happened administratively after some approvals, and then they'd go out and do the work. And now we have to, people are seeing what actually happened behind the scenes, so to speak, before. And I think that's fine that we're given this proper consideration, but I think that this and the next one are going to need to be treated the same.
Okay,
That's all I'd like to say.
Just to clarify, when you reconsider, again, you're voting on a specific proposal resolution that you voted on previously, not an amended, not as I know with this Green Road proposal, again, we received the email with the proposed redesign. That's not what we're addressing. So I hope that helps clarify. Councilmember Ackerman?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Just to cut through this, I guess I don't really care what the process is for how we get to looking at a new proposal. I just think it's important that we discuss that
Okay.
publicly and try to do it. I mean, the reason I did propose a reconsideration did have some thought behind it, which I'm happy to share, because we'll need to apply it to Councilmember Nelson's coming motion as well. The only reason that I looked towards this instead of just kind of starting from scratch was that the resurfacing was scheduled for next week. And I figured this would be a legislative action that would show staff that we as a body were still interested in discussing this further before the resurfacing happened. So again, I don't really care what the process is of how we get to another conversation. I just think it's important that that conversation happen and we consider, better plans as they come forward. But it seemed to me 2 weeks ago that this would at least give staff some clarity that we as a body, through a legislative action, we're still thinking about it, if that made sense, as opposed to just some council members asking.
Thank you. Is Mr. Cupie here? Did he leave? No, you're here. Thank you. Since we're now talking about road resurfacing,
Is this on the motion to reconsider?
it's not, but Councilmember Ackerman did bring this up.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Point-
no,
point of order? Okay, go ahead.
because this has been interjected as a rationale for reconsidering this because the road resurfacing is planned. I just want to clarify that we can resurface a road, and we're talking about paint, and we can paint it.
And again, I'm not married to any one process, it just
So a
as long as we
question for
get
Mr.
there.
Cupie, if you could speak to that? Can you resurface, mill and resurface the road?
Yes, but it's not just paint. If council's asking us to come back, then we would probably do it in paint instead of thermoplastic, which is what we would normally use after resurfacing. Paint is a far cheaper and easier product to remove.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions? Councilmember Griswold?
One of the reasons I raised this right after our last vote is I'm concerned with the transition where the existing road diet ends right now on Green Road, because it's really awkward. And so I wanted to make sure that it was at least extended down so that it wasn't, the transition right now is basically at a crosswalk. And so it's distracting when you're supposed to be looking for pedestrians at the crosswalk. So whatever we do today, I don't think we should just say, don't do anything and leave green exactly the way it is, because we do have that problem.
Okay, and again, we're reconsidering what was before us on August 5th. Councilmember Grand.
Thank you. Well, I have all due respect for your analysis, Mayor Pro Tem Lim. I'd like to ask Mr. McDonald if he can walk us through what the procedure is, since we're going to, as Councilmember Hayner pointed out, we're going to go through this again in hopefully just a few minutes. So, so can we bring this back for reconsideration and then have a second motion to bring back a modified plan? Is that procedurally okay? Or is there an alternative that can get us there perhaps in a more expedient manner that would get us to the same place? Because I'm with Councilmember Ackerman. I don't really care what the process is. I just want it to be correct. And
Let me repeat the question to make sure that I'm answering the correct question. So I think the proposed procedure that you're talking about is there'd be, after the motion for reconsideration, if that passes, the original motion is on the floor. And that would open that original motion back up for debate. The council has done this before. Once that motion is on the floor, can you amend the motion? I believe that's what you were asking.
yes.
It's funny because I've kind of been sitting here trying to just confirm that because Robert's rules are difficult, to say the least. And so I will say this. Generally, the city has done that. The council has done that before. That is, once you get to the original motion, you've kind of amended it. And so once it's on the floor, but you have to pass the original motion for reconsideration first before that original motion comes back.
So in your opinion, that's the more expedient way than just voting down the motion for reconsideration and having staff come back with a modified plan?
I think it's a preference issue. I don't, not being familiar with the detail, I'm not sure if staff is prepared, if you're prepared to amend that original motion tonight or not. Or were you just kind of reconsidering it to ask staff to do some additional work and have it come back?
I think it's that. I think it was, well, and it's Councilmember Ackerman's, but I think my understanding was that it was to then postpone it one more meeting to come back so that council could look at the plans in detail, get questions answered, and perhaps at the meeting on September 3rd, vote on vote it up or down.
Right.
So I'm just asking procedurally, what's the best way to get there? Because
Well, I guess I
maybe
will say
doing
this,
the
I'm
same
not
thing.
sure that if there's a legal distinction here. I think you have two alternatives that it sound like are going to get to you to a next meeting where you're making a decision. And so I guess I would look to the folks who are preparing that underlying information, and if there's a preference, that's where you may seek that preference. But I think that either way, it sounds like you're going to be at a future meeting or next meeting before you make that decision.
I will just, because
Mr.
again,
Lazarus.
I've seen the redesign, and Mr. Lazarus, so we're being asked to reconsider, again, what was brought forward to us on August 5th. But the end game here is to not ultimately revisit that, but a different plan. And I think the question, if I may, that Councilmember Grand was asking is, what's the cleaner path forward? Just to bring forward the new plan and consider that, instead of bringing back one that's going nowhere, frankly. Mr. Lazarus?
I agree with Mr. McDonald. You have two different paths to get to the same place. The changes on green or not, you can decide whether they're significant enough to call it a new plan or they're minor revisions. Either way, we get to the same place where
Called it a
council,
revised plan.
where council can get to the same place to consider it at the next meeting. I think the timing of it is more important to us than it is the mechanism, because we do want to resurface and restripe, and you don't want to leave the road unstriped for a long period of time. So I think we're fine with either path that council's comfortable with, so that you can look at revised drawings at the next meeting.
Councilmember Hayner?
So if we approve this motion to bring it back, what's before us, and then if we did have a revised plan in our hand, we could say, I'd like to bring this amendment to what it was now before us, and then we would vote on that, right? But we're not certain that we have that, and the same may be the case for the next one. I don't think we have that plan in front of us, do we?
Well, I'm
I've-
hearing that most people did not see it or
Okay,
haven't
I
seen it. I
mean,
know that.
I could go
that
look
Mr.
at it right
Lasser
now,
sent it
you
to
know?
us on the 14th, right.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the plan. Like, if that's the one, I did see that, and so someone would have to
That's,
move
again,
to
not in front of us.
amend it, yeah.
If I could, I think
Councilmember
I'll save us some
Ackerman?
time.
So we've all now talked multiple times.
Yeah, I think I'll save us some time. If, we all acknowledge that we're okay with having a conversation, a public conversation and debate about a revised plan, but it sounds like from some people on council, some of my colleagues, that the preferred option would just be to let the August 5th vote go down and look forward to a new revised plan coming back to council. If that's the preferred route, I am more than happy to withdraw the motion to
Okay.
reconsider. That's just a means to an end for me. I really don't care.
Okay.
So, if I may.
Councilmember Eaton?
So to respond to Councilmember Hayner's concern, the distinction between this and the next resolution is that the next resolution will bring back something that was approved, and hopefully that will be denied and sent back to staff for them to also reconfigure that so that there's 2 bike lanes. But we will just simply be dispensing with that previously approved plan and asking staff to bring something else, just like we're asking staff to bring something else for Green Road. So I think that they're very consistent. There's no inconsistency there. What we're doing is we're saying no to both of these plans and asking for something different, to come forward as a new resolution on some future council agenda.
And then just to speak to what's still before us, which is this reconsideration, then the suggestion is that a no to this reconsideration sends it back to a no state, where staff can feel free to bring forward a revised plan, and a no on the next one, although I voted for that one, is a hopeful no for me. You're suggesting that it is also then defeated where it wasn't before, and it comes back with a plan that is an improvement that I can also support. Is that's what you're saying? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
So Councilmember Ackerman, have you withdrawn, or are you proposing to withdraw?
Yeah, I'm happy to withdraw.
Does it take any action by council?
I think if a second needs to approve of
A
that.
second, someone second it?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Councilmember Eaton. So it is vote on the withdrawal.
I just want
To the withdrawal, Councilmember Ramlawi. That
I
is
just
what
wanted
is,
to thank Councilmember Ackerman for doing
Yeah, we
that
did.
and just trying to move the ball ever so slowly. I will save comment for the next motion.
okay. It is withdrawn. Thank you, Councilmember Ackerman. In the meantime, I would ask that, you all just check your email, because the revised plan is there, and you heard me speak to it, so. DC 2, the motion to reconsider the resolution to proceed with a road reconfiguration pilot for Traverwood Drive from Huron Parkway to Plymouth Road. Moved by Councilmember Nelson, seconded by Councilmember Griswold. Councilmember Nelson.
I was on the winning side of this one, and so as a favor to my colleagues who voted against it, I'm offering this, I'm offering a reconsideration of this. I'm going to ask my colleagues to explain their thinking on it. It's not in my ward. I'm opening up room for conversation for people who are, they are more expert in this ward.
Councilmember Hayner.
Well, I supported this, and so the only reason I would vote it down now is if staff was coming before me and saying that the improvements that they thought were even better than what I had approved last time. right? I mean, I supported this fully last time. I mean, I had some reservations about the need for parking, and I had concerns that were expressed by folks at the public hearing for this. That I think I saw Mayor Pro Tem Lum and Councilmember Griswold at, and they were concerned about doors and getting doored and so on. And also the legitimate concerns that adding parking really isn't down this path of road dieting Vision Zero action. It seemed to be sort of a left field, sort of a throw in there. And nonetheless, I supported it. So I'm loath to vote against something I supported unless we're coming back with something even better for me to support. So is that what's going to happen here?
We have, again, the specific proposal before us.
Okay.
And Mr. Hess, I've not seen, unlike Green Road, I'm not aware that there have been meetings or discussions about directing staff to come back with a different proposal for Traverwood. Could you speak to that?
Yes. We weren't anticipating the discussion tonight, so we didn't have any materials prepared. But we did mention, I believe, at one of the city council meetings where this was discussed, that we would happily come back with a proposal that included bike lanes on both sides, that the impact in terms of a road diet is the same, right? In terms of whether you're using that reallocated space for parking or bike lane.
Bikes.
So, the actual impact and all the metrics we gave you in terms of impact to vehicle delay and all that still remain the same, because it's still the same number of lanes. It's just a question of what do you do with the kind of extra pavement. So really, it's just a design consideration. And so if council gives us direction in terms of what that design is, if it is for an added bike lane, we can gladly come back with that if that's the direction we get.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Griswold?
Yeah, thank you. That would be great to have bike lanes on both sides, and my only other concern was from a comment that Councilmember Hayner made, saying that the non-motorized transportation plan asked that, or specified that sub-11-foot lanes require additional engineering, and knowing that a bus with the mirrors out is 10 feet wide, I had some concern, because we definitely want to encourage mass transit, and we want to make sure that the buses can move through there comfortably.
I think the good news is the buffer helps with that, right? Because these would be buffered bike lanes, and so they would allow for the safe passage of the transit vehicle and not conflicting with other users of the roadway.
I have put 10-foot lanes in on bus routes in other locations without a problem. But as Raymond said, the increased buffering kind of negates the issue of the overhang of the mirrors.
Councilmember Grand?
Thank you. Just another procedural question. Is there any reason why we couldn't, if everyone is in agreement that we just have 2 bike lanes instead of parking, why we can't just vote for that this evening? And just amend it?
On the reconsideration.
Right, but can we vote on a reconsideration and then just say, Mr. Hess, please put 2 bike lanes instead of parking and move forward?
Even though this proposal
Because
is not before us?
it seems like most people are pretty happy with that.
Mr. Hess, I have a follow-on question to Councilmember Grand's request. When this came before us on August 5th, you or someone shared with us that when asked why add parking on Traverwood, that it was being proposed in response to requests from both the Ann Arbor Public Library and the Islamic Center. And I'm presuming that their desire for parking there has not changed, but I think before we go forward and just automatically make this change tonight, which I'm having difficulty with since that's not what's before us, but I suppose we could just amend it, to get that feedback from them again, and just to confirm that this will, I don't know, not negatively impact their operations. Were there any other, because the feedback on this was minimal from the residents in the area, except for the library and the Islamic Center folks. So
you would, just so I can clarify, you'd ask us to reach back out to confirm that they're okay?
well, I suppose they're not
if
going
it's
to change their position,
okay.
but yeah, but if we're doing this on the fly as proposed, That feedback would always be
I
helpful, I
have
think.
the feedback from the mosque.
I'm sorry?
I have the feedback from the mosque. The mosque needs parking on Friday afternoon, starting at 1 o'clock. And so one of the concerns is that if it's used as commuter parking, sort of like a park and ride lot, that the parking would not be available at 1 o'clock. So that's the only time they need additional parking.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments? Councilmember Malley?
I can only imagine how staff feels right now. I will not be voting for reconsideration. I'm getting frustrated down here. This came to council once. We kicked it back down to transportation. It came back to council. We debated it. We voted. Now it's coming back to council. Now we're debating it. Now we're going to make changes on the fly. I think this is getting a little bit out of hand. I think we need to vote and move on, make decisions and move on. We're not going to be able to run this city and its $400 million budget in this fashion. And I'm really getting annoyed, to be honest with you. And we need to make votes, bring up the issues, have the questions. Staff has been very responsive. And now we're going back and forth, and this is just getting to be ludicrous, to be honest with you. It's bananas.
Councilmember Griswold?
I am equally frustrated, but we do not have a Vision Zero leader. We have an open position right now. We know that we have to fill it, and people die on roadways when we make simple little oversights. It is very important that we get this right, and staff is behind this change. In fact, Raymond Hess offered it as an alternative at the last meeting, so I don't see this as a significant change. And to add to that, in July of this year, staff reported 8 pedestrian crashes. The 5-year average is 2.1. We have a crisis in this community, and it demands that we step up and address it and make sure that what we're doing is in line with Vision Zero, and it's going to create a safer environment.
Thank you. So I'm hoping at this juncture we can take the vote on the reconsideration. Councilmember Nelson?
Only because it's going to be peculiar. I actually share some of Councilor Ramlawi's sentiments on this issue. I was willing to bring this up for reconsideration to open conversation, but I'm not feeling a lot of solid argument about why we're kind of coming up with our own plan for this. I had reservations about putting parking on one side and only bike lane on one side, but I was happy for us to move on. At any rate, even though I brought this up, that's the reason I'm going to vote against it, because I don't feel like we're having a real productive conversation about specific reasons why we're switching this up. And we were actually we had a lot of people who were arguing to us that the proposals that we were considering at the last meeting were very precise and scientific, and now it turns out that we can sort of arbitrarily change them. And even if staff is in support of it, it just feels really peculiar to me. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember, I did it again. Clerk Boudreaux, will you please take the roll?
Mayor Taylor is absent. Councilmember Eaton?
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson?
No.
Councilmember Smith?
No.
Councilmember Ramlawi?
No.
Councilmember Hayner?
Yes.
Councilmember Bannister?
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold?
Yes.
Councilmember Lum?
Yes.
Councilmember Grand?
Yes.
Councilmember Ackerman?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, I understand the process correctly. The resolution to proceed with the road reconfiguration pilot for Traywood Drive from Huron Parkway to Plymouth Road is before us for your reconsideration. Councilmember Eaton?
So I would like to send this back to staff, and I don't care whether we vote no on this and then ask them to bring back a 2-bike lane plan, or if we adopt a 2-bike lane plan that's not currently in front of us. But this road will be safer for bicyclists if we have a bicycle lane on each side of the road. And the resolution we passed at the last meeting didn't include that. And so I don't have a strong preference as to how we reject the previous plan and ask for a bike lane on each side, but I think that's the safest way to address the traffic on this particular street.
Councilmember Smith.
I'd defer to Mr. Lazarus, who was also raising his hand
I
for
appreciate that.
process
Okay,
question.
Mr. Lazarus.
From an engineering standpoint, I would prefer not to have engineering done on the fly by non-licensed professionals. So my preference would be that council wants us to reconsider it. You would not try and design a solution this evening.
Okay.
And let Mr. Yupi, Mr. Hutchinson, and team come back with a design that they're comfortable with, understanding the desires of council.
Thank you.
So I would make a motion to postpone this matter until, how long do you need? September 16th?
September 5th?
Third is the next meeting.
Okay, I would make a motion to postpone this until September 3rd meeting for the purpose of staff providing an alternative with bike lanes on both sides.
Okay, is there support for the postponement? Councilmember Hayner supports the postponement to to September 3rd. Councilmember Hayner?
To share my far-end compatriots' frustration, why don't we do this for the first one? What happened? What just happened there? What just happened there? Yeah.
I could speak
I
to
get
that.
it. I know what Councilmember Eaton said about it, but, so, I mean, yeah, I'm happy to support this postponement to allow staff to bring back the proper engineering for us.
If I may, I'll address your question, Councilmember Hayner. From my perspective, I voted for this reconsideration. Why? Because the two council members who represent this area desire to have it reconsidered. So I will defer to my colleagues who represent a given area. On Green Road, what did your Ward 2 colleagues want? I wish that we would have received the same consideration, frankly, from our colleagues. That's unfortunate that we did not. I will always defer to the ward representative of a given area on an issue that affects their neighborhoods. So that was, in that regard, an easy call for me. I will say, again, that, as I said on August 5th, when this came before us, that I could go either way. I heard that there was an interest in adding parking to address concerns presented by the library and the Islamic Center. And as you know, when I said I could go either way, what did I do on August 5th? I shoved my chair back and said, what do you want? Because I'm deferring to you. You represent this area, and you expressed to me your desires, so I voted accordingly. I'd like to see us do more of that, frankly. I mean, it should be kind of intuitive, but, in my view. Anyway, that explains my vote on what just happened. I hope that's helpful.
It is, and a reminder that I voted against Green on August 5th.
Other, Councilmember Remlauer, did you?
I don't know what to say at this point. You know, I'm a cyclist. Some years I cycle 5,000 to 6,000 miles a year. Since joining council and campaigning, that is down significantly. Cars that are parked on the road actually help slow traffic down, okay? So if you're a cyclist, you know the dangers of being doored. You don't ride that close to parked cars. So this notion that cars parked on one side of the street pose a significantly higher risk to cyclists is an opinion, is not factual, in my opinion. We had advocates in here advocating for this. And it's just, again, I'm just going bananas down here. I'm just frustrated. I don't see how we're going to make any decisions if we're like this. This is amazing. And, you know, again, back to the procedural question that Councilmember Hayner brought up. It just seems like we're picking and choosing. Another point here is that, yes, I do defer to my council reps when issues are in their ward. But when you're talking about transportation, you're talking about connectivity, you're talking about things that transcend wards. And we cannot have decisions made solely based on what those ward reps say when it comes to transportation. That's just going to lead us to a hodgepodge of solutions. So I think it's not a fair assumption to put on that we're going to defer these type of decisions to ward reps as much as some other issues. Transportation affects us all. No matter what part of the city we're in, we're trying to get through it, and it's not a ward-specific issue as some other matters may be. Thank you.
Councilmember Eaton?
Are we voting on a motion to postpone?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Any other comments on the motion to postpone? Clerk Boudreaux, will you take the roll call vote?
Mayor Taylor, absent. Councilmember Eaton.
Yes.
Councilmember Nelson.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
Councilmember Remlawi.
Yes.
Councilmember Hayner.
Yes.
Councilmember Bannister.
Yes.
Councilmember Griswold.
Yes.
Councilmember Lum.
Yes.
Councilmember Grand.
Yes.
Councilmember Ackerman.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Are there communications from the city attorney?
We have one more
Oh,
thing.
we do?
DB1.
Well, that's going to get postponed.
Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies. Sorry. DB1, the resolution to approve the Garnet Site Plan and Development Agreement, 325 East Summit Street. Planning Commission recommendation to approve. Moved by Councilmember Eaton, seconded by, supported by Councilmember Ackerman. Discussion. Councilmember Eaton.
So before the developer left, I assured them that I would seek postponement of this. I think postponement till that same meeting, September 16th, is appropriate. But if it turns out that that'll be the first reading of the zoning ordinance, we may have to postpone this yet again at that meeting. But I would move to postpone it to September 16th.
Second. Councilmember Griswold. Discussion. The motion to postpone to September 16th. Clerk Boudreaux, will you take?
I think you can do
I
it
don't
by
think there's-
claim.
I'm sorry?
Ask if there's any
Voice
dissent.
voice vote, okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. Now, are there communications from the city attorney?
There still are not.
Okay, thank you. Can someone please move to accept the clerk's report of communications, petitions, and referrals? Moved by Councilmember Hayner, seconded by Councilmember Eaton. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The clerk's report is approved. We now come to public comment, general time. Any member of the audience may speak at public comment. General time, and speakers need not have signed up, in advance. Speakers have 3 minutes in which to speak, so please pay close attention to the time clock. As a matter of courtesy, we may only have one person speaking at a time. And finally, if you require assistance while speaking before council, we would be delighted to provide it. Is there anyone who would like to speak at public comment? Please come forward.
Council members and Mayor Lum.
Pro tem.
Pro tem. Let me just read to you something. A revised U of M Board of Regents ordinance has been proposed and is posted for public comment. The ordinance covers the regulation of parking and traffic and the use of protection of U of M buildings and property. Please address any comments to public comments at umich.edu by August 27th. I'm not speaking on behalf of the university. It's just myself, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention that, check out the Regents ordinance, and the public should check it out too and see what changes they're making. Again, not speaking on their behalf, but
just want to say, have a good night.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ed Vilmetti. I had some questions about the city, the city's new front hall welcome desk. So in my normal course of events, I asked for a bunch of stuff about that and got back a bunch of stuff, and I've been reading through it. The information records I got was interesting as much for what it contained as for what it didn't contain. The city went through a elaborate standard process for qualifying a vendor for its front desk services, collected a bunch of information about the various companies that had bid, things like biographies of the principals of the organizations and financial information and insurance and a whole bunch of other stuff. Lots of good work in figuring out that we got the right people. Then the system went into place, and the vendor engaged a subcontractor to actually manage the software that runs at the front desk. It's a software for visitor management. It gets sold to universities and companies and some amount of municipalities. It's from a company based in Australia. And I asked, as part of my request for this information, it's like, did the city have a contract with this Australian company? No responsive records. And so I guess, as far as I can tell, like, I'm going to try to figure this out just by looking at the record to see whether members of this body made a decision about the software that's collecting information about visitors to City Hall. Doesn't appear that that happened. And I note that only because, and again, this is sort of uncertain yet, the software can be configured in multiple ways, like good software, and it's possible to configure this software to collect photographs, to compute biometric information, to do face matching, all that stuff. I don't know whether the city is doing any of this, right? Don't know yet. I've been assured no, but I don't know. Actually, I don't know if the city knows, because they didn't install the software. They didn't buy this software. They didn't specify this software. And so there's a management oversight concern. But there's also the wonder as to, well, you know, is a picture by face now stored in a database by a private company in Australia? I mean, it probably already is, but, you know, is there a new one? Thanks.
Thank you. See no other members of the public here to address council at this time. Are there communications from council? Is there a motion to adjourn? Moved by Councilmember, oh, it's a closed session, no, sorry.
No, there's no closed session.
Thank you for the confirmation. And appreciate the prompt. Motion to adjourn, moved by, to adjourn, Councilmember Bannister, second Councilmember Griswold. All in favor, please say aye. Aye, opposed. We are adjourned. Thank you, Jackie. You're welcome. We should bring you home. This was, oh. Thank you. This,